I'd like to bring this special Goleta City Council meeting to order of October the 27th, 2022. If you'll all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we will have roll call.
Councilmember Richards.
Here.
Councilmember Kiriakou.
Here.
Councilmember Seves.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tempore Caston. Here. And Mayor Perotti.
I'm here. We will have public forum at this time for anybody that wishes to speak to anything that's not on our agenda this evening.
And our first speaker is Richard Foster.
What a shock that is. Will he never shut up, they all said? Good evening, City Council members. Our city has sort of a 20-year history of bad choices when it comes to infrastructure repair. We've recently had 10 years of very extremely low inflation, a golden opportunity for us to catch up, and yet it didn't happen. 4.5 years ago, a city employee told me the city was facing some very difficult decisions because they'd been underfunding infrastructure for years, and the dry years had let them get away with it. Well, 13 out of the last 20 years were below normal rainfall, but 4 years ago, we got well above average rainfall, and our asphalt roads began to crumble. Now we have high inflation, and the council's answer is higher taxes, yet you continue to vote for underfunded projects. I mean, why are we starting a new bicycle path when the one at the end of Cathedral Oaks has been fenced off and closed for years? I like Los Canaros' footbridge, but at a cost of $2.5 million to pull it out and replace it, I can live without the footbridge and put it into fixing our streets. Our roads have been crumbling for 20 years. How are you going to maintain any of the new projects that you want to build, given the current infrastructure delay? Last week, the city released a 90-second video that listed 8 areas where this money might be spent. What I would find informative is how you would vote on a budget next year. Main Council Member Seves has made it perfectly clear he doesn't believe in any tax increases at this time due to soaring costs for food, fuel, and rent. For those of you who do support this tax increase, I'd like to see you put your words down exactly how much you would put to what part of this thing. 5%, 10%, 20%. Drivers think they're going to get their roads fixed. The environmentalists think they're going to get their creeks clean. The bicyclists think they're going to get more paved asphalt. And the old people think they're going to get their sidewalks and the tripping hazards fixed. And they're all likely to be disappointed. These monies go into the general fund, as you well know, and they can be used for anything, including just pay raises. After all, our police department just asked for a $2 million raise from the city. This hypothetical pie of $10.6 million divided 8 ways would give each area $1.1 million per year. I mean, wow, you could pay down our backlog infrastructure in only 45 years this way. That's if there's no inflation, nothing falls apart, and you choose to build nothing new. Our Public Works Department has done an admirable job as they struggle to keep up with years of neglect, decay, and underfunding, but there's no reason to believe their budget shortfalls will be mitigated by a higher sales tax. Considering recent votes, the money will probably be used for new underfunded projects that will then begin a life of neglect and decay as soon as they're finished. It's time for better choices, not higher taxes. People should vote no on B 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
If there are any members of the public on the Zoom app who wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature and I will call on you. And I do not see any responses at this time.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any amendments or adjustments to this agenda?
Madam Mayor, we just have one item on the agenda. It's the first item and the last item, so we have none.
Okay, thank you. Okay, would you read the item into the record, please?
Hollister Avenue Old Town Interim Striping Project Update, Preferred Alternative Selection and CEQA Exemption, Project Number 9114.
Thank you so much. At this time, we will have a staff presentation, and this is, we are opening up a public hearing, and we will have questions for staff from the council I will open up the public hearing portion and allow 3 minutes. I know I see a lot of folks here in the audience, and assuming there may be some on Zoom as well, and I've made the decision that we will all you will all have 3 minutes. I'm not going to cut your your time short, even if there's a lot of people, because this is an important topic, and we want to be able to hear from all of you and answer your concerns or questions. Then we will have more staff response, council questions, close the public testimony, close the council, go into deliberation, close the public hearing, and entertain a motion. And I also like to let you know that the public will, I'm going to make it possible, so we will ask our questions, but I want to go to the public as soon as possible because we want to hear from you. So stay tuned, don't anybody leave, we'll get to you. Thank you. Mr. Ebling, go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Prodi and members of City Council. Tonight, the Department of Public Works will provide a presentation and recommendation for the Hollister Old Town Interim Striping Project. With me tonight is our Neighborhood Services Director, Jaime Valdez. We also have our Deputy Director of Public Works, Nina Buelna. And in the audience, we have Teresa Lopes, one of our engineers, our senior engineer that worked on the Complete Streets project, so if we have any questions there. And then also our main presenter will be our contract traffic engineer, Derek Rapp. And I'm going to make a couple remarks first, and then we'll move forward with the presentation. Tonight's presentation will include a recommendation for Alternative 1. In the recent past, the Complete Streets study was completed for the Hollister Old Town Corridor. 3 alternatives and the no project alternative were studied. The alternatives in the Complete Streets study included significant changes to hardscapes such as curb, gutter, and sidewalk modifications. The Old Town Interim Striping Project proposes only striping changes that are largely based on Alternative 1 from the Complete Streets project. So noting that the exception with how we would propose to do this project is that there would be no hardscape improvements included. So with that, it should be noted that as with the Complete Streets study, there was a no project alternative to the interim striping project, and that should also be considered. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our contract traffic engineer, Derek Rapp, and he will take us through the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ebling. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Ebling. Let me screen. Okay. Perfect. There's a delay. It's not going to presentation mode.
Go to slideshow. No, not the slideshow. Go to from beginning.
Yeah, see, it's not.
It's not doing it.
Well, we'll just make do with how it is here. Thank you. Again, my name is Derek Rapp. I'm the contract traffic engineer with the City of Goleta. We're here obviously to talk about Hollister Avenue Old Town Interim Striping Project. Just an outline of the agenda for the presentation here today, a little bit of the history surrounding the project. We'll cover quite a bit of information about the existing conditions, and those existing conditions have been studied for many, many years and up to present day. So we have quite a bit of information to share. Then we'll talk about the project goals of the project, the project alternatives. Will be a discussion there. Like Mr. Ebling referred to, there were several alternatives considered, and the one we bring forward tonight is the preferred alternative at this point. We also had a very good community outreach. We had a meeting last month at the Goleta Valley Community Center Received quite a bit of great input and feedback. It was a very good meeting, well attended. And then a little bit about the next steps. So the history of Old Town is, there's been discussions going on for as long as I've been here, and probably for as long as many of you have been here as well, but at least for over 30 years from what I've been able to find in documents, the discussion of what to do about Old Town and how to improve upon Old Town has been studied and discussed. Most recently, in the most recent history, 2011, there was a parking study, a parking analysis done, and that we will have some numbers to share out of that study. And then the 2018 Complete Streets project, which is sort of the birthplace of this current alternative, there was quite a bit of discussion about key issues like parking, how much time it took to travel from one end of the corridor to the other, safety aspects of the roadway, and obviously operations. Shortly after that, as a part of the Eckwell-Fowler extension project, there was also another circulation study done, updating the traffic model for the area and studying the entire area, including Old Town. So here's a little bit of some of the data that we've gleaned over the years. Essentially, the volumes in Old Town on Hollister have been slowly trending downwards since 2005, which is the oldest information I was able to find in our records. A little over 2,000 vehicles per hour in the peak hour, down to just about 1,700 in 2019. And we actually collected data recently, earlier this month, and have just about the same number of vehicles, 1,650, something like that in 2022. So it's been slowly decreasing, maybe leveling off at this point, to somewhere around 1,700 per hour in the peak hour. And because of that, the traffic model projections that were done as part of the Eckwell-Fowler showed that in 2042, based off of this new baseline, they're actually projecting 2042 volumes to be very, very similar to 2005 counts. So over 40 years or so, essentially the volumes are going to remain fairly consistent. Another thing that was studied as a part of the Complete Streets efforts was trying to determine who was using Old Town Hollister roadway. Was it primarily being used for people who live and work off of this main segment of roadway? And what was found through use of cell phone data and other information was that only about 2/3 of the traffic on Old Town Hollister was there for Old Town Hollister related purposes. The other third or so was using it as part of the street network. So there is a reasonable amount of traffic that is using this for non-Old Town related purposes. Another key data point, obviously, one of the ones that's actually one of the more pressing ones for businesses in the area is parking. And this was out of the 2011 study, about 65 existing spaces within the study area between Fairview and Kinman on street on Hollister. The side streets, about 1 block off in that same reach, is about 330 parking spaces. And very interestingly, the off-street lots within that same area, all the private parking totaled up to nearly 1,400 spaces. So there is quite a bit of parking in the area. It's just hidden behind a lot of businesses, and in some cases used for storage or other business uses. So in total, you have nearly 1,800 parking spaces in this half-mile stretch of Old Town. Now, looking at how the parking is distributed, this is a map, a color-coded map that indicates the colors that are closer to red indicate a very, very high occupancy, like 90+%. And as you get down in the blues and purples, it's a much lower percentage of parking. And you can see significant number of side streets are in the red, as well as the northern portions of Hollister between, say, Nectarine and Kinman. All of those areas are essentially completely parked in the peak hours, which is usually in the early afternoon on a weekday. Another issue that has been raised is speeds. And this is a speed profile of the speeds that were collected in 2019 as part of the speed survey. And you can see that the 85th percentile there is 32 miles per hour. But because of some of the collisions, the collision data and the number of collisions there, we were able to reduce that the enforceable speed limit down to 25 miles per hour. And the area of concern is this red circle area. It's these more extreme speeders. While they make up, on a percentage basis, they make up a very small number. Actually about 1% of the daily traffic is recorded at over 40 miles per hour. And that's only about 150 cars a day. But those 150 cars a day create such an impact on the people who live and work in that area that those are the people that we're trying to affect with these changes. This gets into the collision data and this will help you understand how we were able to justify a lower speed limit, even though the 85th percentile speeds or the prevailing speeds were higher. There are actually about 105 collisions in this area, specifically between Fairview and Kinman. I believe the number is 88. There's about 20-some collisions that happen just off on the side street or just off on the west side of Fairview or just the east side of Kinman, but all within the area of influence of this segment. Those collisions, when you multiply those by the number of trips that are in the area, you have a rate of nearly 5 collisions per million vehicle miles traveled. The state keeps data on this. They've actually been keeping data on this for many, many years, and they calculated an average rate statewide for these types of facilities, and Old Town Hollister is about 4 times that average rate. So we do see quite a large number of collisions in this very short segment. There's been of those 105, about 40 are injury collisions. And again, that's about 3 times the state average for injury collisions. And about 10% of the total is bike and ped related. Digging a little bit deeper into the collisions, the primary collision factors usually involve both turning vehicles and unsafe speed. So improper turns was the number 1, unsafe speed is the next, and then right-of-way and traffic control violations. Right-of-way violations is essentially someone trying to enter the roadway from a stop sign and doing so when it wasn't appropriate, when there was an appropriate gap in traffic, misjudging or ignoring traffic conditions. Traffic control violation would be something like running a red light or running a stop sign. Some of the smaller percentage factors, parking maneuvers, lane changes, of course, with a reduction in number of lanes, lane changes would be less of an issue. And then DUI is a very small percentage, but also an important factor to consider. And then about the bottom 10% are unknown or other various items. So looking at how our project would address some of these collision factors, improper turns, obviously restrictions of left turns from driveways and side streets at key areas is important, and it will help reduce those collisions and those conflicts. Unsafe speed, reduction of travel lanes, visually narrowing the road for drivers will in the hopes of really addressing those extreme speeders, those 150 cars a day that just find it necessary to use it as a drag strip. That will not be as comfortable with a single lane in each direction. Right-of-way violations. We're improving intersection sight distance at all the intersections, so that drivers will better be able to judge. They will be able to see and respond to oncoming traffic better. And traffic control violations, we do propose equipment upgrades and timing upgrades in order to address some of those issues as well. Next would be operations. This is how the average driver would interact with the roadway. And the way we measure the effectiveness of our work at intersections is by essentially a grading system that's called level of service. A, just like on a report card, A is good, B is slightly worse, C is average, D, we need to talk, F is a big problem. So you can see with the 4 lanes, we're looking at B's and C's, pretty good. And then if we were just to drop to 2 lanes without any other measures, you can see several locations drop into those problematic areas. And if left alone without any other measures, that is what the public would face. Obviously, that's not acceptable. And we have other measures that we're introducing into this project, and you'll see that in a moment, how we can get a adequate level of service with 2 lanes in each direction. Now, talking about the project goals have always been these key tenets of the project. Parking. Parking first and foremost. It's what we hear every time we talk to the public. It's increasing not only the number of parking spaces, but the availability of parking spaces, and that means turnover. So we are talking about not just increasing the number of parking spaces, but putting in time restrictions so that we get that turnover and we don't have people taking up spaces all day or multiple days. Improve traffic safety. I think we talked a little bit about what we know about the collisions that are happening there and some of the countermeasures that we're proposing. Reduce speeds, also discussed in the safety section. Maintain a reasonable vehicle flow. Obviously, we don't want to do a project that just addresses the top 3 and then creates an issue for the traveling public. We need to balance all of these issues.
Excuse me, Councilmember Carriaco has a question.
I'm sorry, just a clarifying question. I understand that the project has a lot of goals, and there's been a long process that got us to this point and a lot of public input and everything. But why isn't like the first goal listed just safety? Without slicing and dicing it between pedestrians and bicycles or even vehicles, just why wouldn't safety be the #1 goal?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Carriaco, that's a great question, and maybe the order of this does not necessarily indicate a priority, but
that's all I needed to hear.
Yeah,
okay. As long as that's okay. As long as I shouldn't infer anything from that.
All right.
I'm good. Thank you.
And actually, they are actually all interrelated, so it's difficult to talk about one without the other. But yes, point is well taken. Adding bike lanes, obviously, the biking community has expressed, and not just the bike coalition folks, but actually neighbors in the meeting were expressing a strong desire to want want and need to be able to ride their bikes out on Hollister Avenue. And the last and maybe a very important distinction is that, again, as Mr. Ebling described, this is a striping project. And this project really has an advantage of being able to study, analyze it, tweak it, adjust it, and without having to make significant, expensive hardscape improvements. And so all of these things are going to be done with very temporary materials that can be changed and adjusted. And this is the cross-section of Alternative 1 that includes 1 lane in each direction, buffered bike lanes, a non-traversable median, and back-end angled parking. The goal, you can see here, this is a photo of what that back-end angled parking looks like. If you've been down to East Beach in Santa Barbara, they have an actual real-life example out there. This is instructional sign that one city used to help people understand how to use the back-end angled parking. But essentially, the reason for the back-end angled parking is, one, it's a way to get angled parking, which is a more efficient way of parking the street. You can get about twice the number of parking spaces that you would with parallel parking. But it also adds some benefits in that you have better intervisibility between bikes and the parking vehicles, both on entering the stall and exiting. And another one that a lot of people don't really think about is when you're actually parked, you're parked with the pedestrians already oriented toward the sidewalk. And when you open your doors, you're shielding the pedestrians from traffic. And it's really kind of a unique configuration compared to, in some cases, in parallel parking, you're opening your door out into traffic and getting out into traffic if you have multiple people in the car. Again, here's some of the advantages. Limits conflicts between angled parking and bikes. Another unique aspect, this is one that came out of Complete Streets, was some of the areas in the future, there's opportunities for parklets and things like that weren't normally there before. We believe about 20, plus or minus 20 parking spaces will be increased in the area. The narrower single lane reduces speeds. Flush median, this is something that we worked on with public safety responders. Provides a lane for emergency responders but also deliveries who use that center lane while limiting the number and designating the location where people can make left turns. As you'll remember, left turns are a big source of collisions out here. Obviously, there are some disadvantages. You don't receive the full impact of the increase in parking because the wider profile of an angled parking space does obstruct visibility from side streets. So you do need to shy away from the side streets slightly more because of the wide profile of an angled parking. So it's not a true 2 to 1. It's maybe 1.5 to 1 increase. And obviously the flush median does restrict some left turns, although we have made sincere efforts at maximizing access to all businesses wherever possible. In balancing access and safety. Proposed parking restrictions. This is a diagram. The green would be the 90-minute zones along Hollister, and also perhaps even the side streets we've looked at. Red would be new red zones that would be there for intersection visibility. Again, as I mentioned, a net increase in this area by about 20 parking spaces is anticipated. Back to traffic operations, you know, we discussed going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, and that obviously going 4 lanes to 2 lanes without doing anything else is going to result in some delays. And so how do we help? What are the other things that we can do to help mitigate that situation? Well, first of all, as you remember, about a third of traffic here is essentially using Hollister using this section of Hollister without stopping for any business in Old Town. And obviously, it's a part of the street network. Obviously, it's not like they're doing anything wrong, but that there is a large quantity, or a third, that is traveling here for non-Old Town business, related business. Also, there's a reasonable number during peak hours that use it as a bypass to the freeway. Therefore, we do believe that a reasonable percentage, maybe 15%, will avoid using this as a cut through in the future because of the fewer lanes. And then also, the way that we can maximize throughput on Hollister is by restricting left turn movements in key areas. Yes, mid-block is some of them, but also at Orange and Rutherford, which actually are 2 locations where we have seen collisions that were resulting from left turns and failure to yields. And then lastly, improving traffic signal timing, the equipment, and the coordination. And as you can see, through those 3 things, we can get the entire corridor, actually with the exception of Kinman, at level service C or better. Now, we presented all the previous information at a public meeting on September 29th. I didn't take a perfect count, but we had sign-in sheets, and from that information, about 35 community members were in attendance. There's a photo here of the people in attendance. It was a full room at the Goleta Valley Community Center. We heard lots of input and feedback. It was a very well, not just well attended, but everyone contributed, and there was a lot of good conversation. Those that were supportive of the project were supportive of bike lane and safety improvements, obviously the increased parking, and the measures that would reduce speeds. Those that expressed opposition were concerned, and rightly concerned, about potential congestion and neighborhood impacts associated with these changes. And they were very interested, whether the project went forward or not, they were very interested in enforcement of traffic and parking violations. And a lot of them also suggested public parking lots be investigated instead of in lieu of street changes. Here's a table of a summary of the feedback. Again, bike lanes, parking enforcement, and congestion were the top issues. But you can see, in general, the folks that were in support of the project were outnumbered the ones that were opposed at this specific meeting. There were several people that were neutral as well. Lastly, I think it's important that this is not a project in a bubble. There's lots of other things happening in and around Old Town, and we're aware of that and are working with the other projects. But essentially, from what we know now of the planning of all these projects, if this project were approved to go forward, this project would be in place first, likely maybe at the most, a couple of months ahead of the start of the Hollister Bridge and the roundabout project. And those projects, the Hollister Bridge, the roundabout project, and the Eckwell extension, those are projected to take about 2 years. So there will be various forms of construction and staging going on in and around this area for the next 2.5 years. Regarding the project, we consulted with the city attorney's office, and in reviewing the project, we found, and with not only the city attorney's office, but also our planning division, that this project is exempt from CEQA under the 15301 exemption, which involves minor alterations to existing streets. And because this is a proposed, we're not changing any curb lines. It's all striping, temporary materials, and signal improvements that are happening completely within the right-of-way and previously disturbed roadways. It's considered minor alterations and exempt under this section. Now to the project delivery schedule. Our original schedule was to be before you. As you'll recall, our original schedule was that this date would have been a second community meeting, and then we were going to come to you in late December, probably the last meeting of this month. And what we've done is combine those two efforts. So there is a savings of time of roughly, a month and a half, 2 months. And so we do believe that if approved tonight, we could accelerate our original schedule of June of this year, maybe a couple of months, and maybe have everything fully in place by June of next year. And then, but that of course depends on a variety of factors. But the decisions here tonight could potentially result in a time savings. And then with that, we recommend that staff's recommendation of alternative 1, as laid out previously with back-in angled parking, 1 lane in each direction, and buffered bike lanes. And also that the council find the project exempt from CEQA. And with that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Council, questions? Council, Mayor Pro Tem Kasdan.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. First, a clarification on the off-street parking. You had indicated there were about 1,300 or 1,350 or so spots that were in lots, parking lots on off-streets. Are those referring to public or private? And are they what's available to the public?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Kasdan, those are private parking lots. So they aren't necessarily available to the public, but, and actually each business operates slightly differently as far as how well they advertise their parking to their customers, but theoretically available to patrons of their business.
Okay, this also includes, though, companies with large numbers of employees or something like that, where it's available for their employees, but not necessarily the public or customers.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Kasdan, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I don't know how, again, I'm not privy to how each business manages their lot. Theoretically, it's available for employees or patrons as the property owner deems appropriate.
Okay. Another question I just wanted to clarify, you didn't really touch upon it, is the question of emergencies and what happens. If you could clarify both how this design, the two-lane thing, is going to accommodate emergencies, both the sort of short-term with, just police or ambulance rushing down the road, as well as some sort of catastrophic.
Yes. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Kasdan. Yes, we actually sat down with the fire department, met with two of the captains there, and actually discussed some of their concerns. Primarily, their issue is anytime there's a single lane in each direction, they don't like to have any sort of vertical barrier between the lanes, because they like that flexibility of having a central lane that would be used as a way of getting around traffic. Also, they prefer being able to stage at a property from both directions without being blocked by some sort of median or other physical structure in the middle. So in working with them, we came up with this concept of a flush median that would be treated with some sort of material as yet undetermined, either a thermoplastic or maybe a stamped asphalt or something that would differentiate it from the rest of the roadway, but still be usable by emergency vehicles and deliveries. We've also cleared with them use of a temporary device. You've probably seen them. I think the best example is on Pacific Coast Highway. They use them because there is no room for a median, they use them along the center line. They're very low profile bump. They're only about 2 inches high. And we're proposing to incorporate those to deter drivers from using it as a two-way left turn lane, but the fire department had no concerns about that from a response standpoint.
Since we're not doing any hardscape and the old lanes are essentially still there, in an emergency, wouldn't you be able to just revert to, in essence, 4 lanes or the whole street available?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Kasdan, I think, that's getting to your other question about in a catastrophic event. And yes, the entire pavement width from curb to curb would be available. And so since there would be no physical barriers to anything, say in that catastrophic event, the Sheriff's Department figured out a way to get everybody go in the same direction. You'd have 5 lanes or more of traffic being able to travel on one direction to get out of there. So I think that this design, again, repeating myself, but this design does not prevent that, and it would be from curb to curb would be usable.
And that median, that area, that'll accommodate deliveries, for instance, also?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions right now.
Councilmember Richards?
Thank you. Well, just in following up to some of the points that my colleague made, I first wanted to ask regarding parking. A couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think, we had approved an easement for Yardi to add 35 new parking spaces. Are they included in the 333 spaces that you mentioned in side streets, or would that be in addition to those existing ones?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Richards, those are not included in that count. This count was actually from that 2011 study, so anything that would have been added. In fact, actually, to be honest, that area along Carson Street is outside of the study area of this area. So it does not include them, and it wasn't within the study area.
Okay, so, but it's really only 2 blocks away or a block and a half away,
Correct.
From where we're talking about. So that could also be added to the inventory.
Correct.
In addition, a few years ago, the city purchased a lot on Orange Street, and I think that gives us another 18 parking spaces on that, 1 block off of
Correct.
Hollister there.
There are 2 public parkings. Sorry, I had the picture. There we go. Nope. There are, in blue here on in the diagram, there are two public lots, one off of Orange Street and then one that's by the bank near and the sheriff's station on the corner of Pine and Hollister. Each of those have in the ballpark of 18 spaces available to the public.
Okay. And then this project would add another around 20, you said, to the
Correct.
inventory. Okay. While you have that up, and can you move one slide to slide 15, I think it was. Just wanted to clarify. In this slide, you mentioned that the left turn lanes would be restricted at Orange and Rutherford. I had thought that it was at Tecolote. Is that not right? Can you clarify that?
Councilmember Richards, you're correct. Yes, it is at Tecolote. You're right.
Okay, so there will continue to be a left turn at Rutherford.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Let's see, another slide, if you could turn to slide 12. This is the one that shows the back in angle parking, and I think this is important to spend some time looking at this because my understanding looking at the plans, if you look at that photograph on the right-hand side, it shows the parking and then a lane of, I guess that's a bicycle lane, and then the lane of traffic next to that. But if you look at the diagram, it looks like there's more to the plan that would be proposed here for Old Town Goleta because there's actually another buffer lane in between the bicycles and the automobiles. Is that correct? Can you walk us through that? Show us.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Richards, that's correct. Actually, in this plan, we have both a bike lane and a buffer between the bike lane and the travel lane. And that really, it serves two purposes. One, it adds to the comfort level of the cyclist and provides them a little more, and drivers a more visual barrier between themselves and the bikes. But it also reserves a larger area for those vehicles that are actually going to back into parking spaces. I mean, this is 8 feet. A normal vehicle is about 6 feet wide, so you can actually pull slightly. You're not going to maybe be completely out of the traveled way, but you'll be more out of the traveled way in order to make that motion backwards into a parking stall. So it has kind of a dual purpose.
Okay, yeah, so although it might not be ideal for cars that are trying to park to, be in the bike lane, if they're only going to be there temporarily, it may provide them an opportunity to move off to the side to do their parking maneuver and let other traffic pass them by.
Correct, and the other thing is really this is about communication between drivers and bikes, and if a car is occupying that bike lane, it's communicating to the oncoming cyclist that he's intending to make that, he or she is intending to make that movement into the parking stall. And given the fact that that driver has just passed that cyclist and made that eye contact, it just goes to the better communication and intervisibility between the two road users.
Okay, thank you. My next question is with regard to the cost. So can you give us an idea of what the total cost involved in the project is and how that would break down? I know you had described it previously as, primarily a restriping project, but it's my understanding that it's actually more than that because it will also include an overlay with the road itself. So can you give us any estimates on maybe how much of the cost is the overlay and how much of it is the striping?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Richards, it really is the lion's share of the costs are associated with paving. So we will be doing paving of the roadway, and that in and of itself is probably 60% of the cost of the project. This is just off the top of my head. And then another significant component is the traffic signal work. And then the actual striping itself is a much smaller component. Now, that being said, there are a couple of aspects of the striping that are going to increase the cost of a normal striping job. Now, the special treatment of the median is a more costly item. And then conflict striping, you've seen like in other areas of Goleta, the green conflict striping for bike lanes. That's another relatively high-priced item from a striping standpoint. But by and large, on a percentage basis of the total project cost, which I believe is in the ballpark of 1.1 million, you know, the majority of it is the paving and the traffic signal work.
Okay, and I'm assuming that the paving is necessary. Can you give us the condition of what the pavement is in this stretch?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Richards, the existing pavement condition actually isn't terrible, but what is important is that we start with a fresh, a clean slate, essentially, for which to put the new stripes on. Because if you attempt to grind off existing traffic striping and then apply new traffic striping, you have shadows from the previous traffic striping, and it gets very confusing. One, it's confusing to the motorist. Two, it's not the most attractive in product. So, so really, it's as much of a function of providing a clean, fresh slate. And you know, I'm an engineer, so I'm partial. Not much looks better than a freshly paved street. So, so that's the intent.
And I understand that there was also another reason to do the grinding and repaving in terms of ADA improvements. Can you speak to that?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, yeah, in general, this road over the years has been paved several times with overlays, and a classic treatment is to do what are called key grinds, or they only grind on either side, and then they just pave over the whole road. And what happens is the road starts to get very crowned, a big curvature. And then if you're in a crosswalk and you're trying to go over that curvature, that running slope is greater than what's allowed under ADA. So what we want to do is grind don't do just the key grinds, which is a common way to approach overlays. We're going to grind all the way across, lower that crown down, and then as we repave, we'll make sure that all that works out so that it meets ADA.
Okay, great, thank you. So what we're looking at then is, we've talked about the ability to evaluate and perhaps restripe this at a later date if it's not working. If push comes to shove, this is just an utter failure and we want to restripe it. We're not going to lose the cost of the repavement. We'll have that. The pavement itself will be in an improved condition at that point.
Exactly. Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, in a perfect world, when you do an overlay, one of the things you should do within a year or two or three is do a slurry seal. And that way you really are taking advantage of that new pavement, and you're keeping it, you're adding to its longevity, so you want to eventually get that 20-year surface. So in the event we came to that conclusion that it just wasn't working out and we needed to do a different striping layout or go back to the original layout, we could do that. We could, and then slurry seal it, which would be great in terms of our pavement maintenance to begin with, and then we can put the fresh striping on top of that.
Okay, all right, thank you. A couple more questions. With regard to the consultation with emergency personnel, I did hear, Mr. Rapp, you mentioned that you had gotten some comment from the fire personnel. And what about the sheriff? Have we also been in contact with them, and have they given us they're okay with the design and commented on whether or not things would be okay for them?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, yes, we have also corresponded with the Sheriff's Department as well, and they've provided us feedback that their preferred alternative is the one that you're looking at today.
Okay, great. And then my last question is, with regard to this future evaluation of the project, and when we assess, at some point, do we have a plan of when we will be planning to evaluate it? Is there something that staff is recommending? And my other question would be, what would be the criteria that we would be using to evaluate?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, I think I can answer that a couple different ways. One is that we will continuously be monitoring once it's installed. Secondly, we will be watching it through construction of the other projects, and ultimately, when we wait for sort of a quote-unquote clean year where construction and everything is done, unfortunately, it'll likely be around 2025 for that. But in the interim, we will obviously continue to monitor it, and something like a safety concern might be something where we would want to reevaluate or potentially bring it back to the council to do something about it. Also, just a performance of the operations of the section. So, for example, while we've done traffic modeling and we've looked at how we are going to improve the traffic signals and the layout with restricting left turns in various locations, ultimately one of my criteria would be to watch how congestion works. And if congestion, say, were getting too extreme and it was going from intersection to intersection where maybe the traffic signal at Rutherford was causing a queuing back to the intersection to the west through that intersection and impacting that intersection, then that would start to be a concern that we're not getting the traffic through the system and that the congestion is getting too much for the system to handle. So there are some criteria like that, and of course, fundamentally, we're going to be monitoring it continuously, really.
Okay, thank you. And I would assume that part of our evaluation would be an increase in safety, hopefully, and that we would see a reduction in traffic accidents, fatalities, injuries.
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, we will keep track of the reported collisions as we do anyway. And then also, I think anecdotally and perception of the public is also very important, that they feel that it is ultimately safer and that anecdotally people are letting us know that they see it as being safer also. So we do want to reach out to the public, listen to the public, what they're saying. And then, of course, we do have the more analytical approach to look at the collision reports. But as we know, not every collision is reported. A collision report isn't always written for every traffic accident. So we want to do both. We want to listen to what the public's saying, and we want to do the analytical approach to the collision reports.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Esteves.
On that last point, Mr. Eberly, of the 40-odd people that went to that public meeting on Hollister, and I think, Mr. Rapp, you said you took a sign-up of those that attended. How many were from Old Town, residents, and how many were businesses in Old Town?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Esteves, I don't have that information. I didn't track that information.
Okay. I mean, the whole thing here is listening to the residents in Old Town and the businesses. So we've received a lot of emails the last few days, a lot of them from Old Town. Has staff had an opportunity to review those emails and are be prepared to respond to the issues that they're addressing?
Councilmember Esteves, absolutely.
Have we reviewed the emails?
I've reviewed all the ones that I've been sent, yes.
Including the ones that came today?
I don't know how many, but I have received. I have received a number of them from the clerk.
But we will be reviewing them.
Absolutely.
If I can address a few issues just from the stuff you presented today, I have spent a lot of time reviewing this. I did spend some time with staff. I was here when we talked about this 10 years ago, so I remember the discussions then, and I definitely remember the discussions in our last meeting. So all this is very fresh in my mind. The first question I have has to do with traffic circulation, and you spent some time talking about the parking study and the restricted time zones. We spent a lot of time and money on that years past, and we identified not only 90-minute zones, but we identified 15-minute zones, especially on the side streets where we have many businesses where they had requested that. Is that part of the study?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Esteves, yes, actually, I failed to mention that in my presentation, but there are a number of 15-minute zones listed in this exhibit here, and we also would plan on discussing with individual property owners about the use of 15 minutes, because there are some property owners that that even a 90-minute turnover is not realistic. It's not enough for them. They deal with a very high turnover business, and we need to really coordinate that amongst all the current existing businesses. Yes.
Okay, well, 90 minutes is kind of the standard. I mean, I've talked to a lot of businesses in Old Town, and they gave me one situation where somebody parks their car in Hollister and takes a plane to go work in LA, and the car stays there. So it's just, talking about circulation. In the staff report, we talk about the use of our parking enforcement vehicle and the time zones, and not doing it until after the project. That doesn't make any sense to me, because that really will need to speed up. I mean, it's been my experience, and first of all, you need two officers. The report talks about maybe having another officer. You can't have one officer doing time zones and at the same time doing abandoned vehicles. It doesn't work, because once you go, and in the old days, we'd lay a mark. I used to do that. You'd lay a mark. Now it's all done by the computer, and they'll grab the time. But if you're off doing a towing vehicle, you're not going to get back in time for that 90 minutes. So I mentioned it to staff. Hopefully that is an issue that we're going to cover as far as find a second officer. You mentioned travel time. And you've timed the travel from, I would imagine, Fairview to Kellogg. What's the difference in the travel time going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Aceves, I don't have an exact number for you, but if you look at the levels of service, when on the before condition, Bs and Cs throughout the corridor to essentially all Cs, that translates to maybe 15 seconds per intersection. So, it's less than a minute, I would say.
Okay, you're speculating.
Well, it's not. We didn't.
Okay,
We don't
okay.
measure. We didn't measure it in a travel time standpoint. We measured it in a level of service per intersection.
I'm glad you brought this slide up, because that was one of my questions. Am I reading this correctly, that from a 4-lane roadway, there's one intersection there, we're going from a B, which, as you said, is a good grade, to an F, which is a bad grade?
That's correct.
Why did we do that?
I'm sorry?
Why would we do that?
This was to show in the presentation, if you just changed from 4 to 2 lanes and did nothing else, that's what would happen. And then in the next slide.
Okay, I'm sorry, go back to that slide a minute.
Yes.
Am I misunderstanding then that with a 4-lane roadway, you're changing the level of services to an F in a 2-lane roadway? That's, if I, just looking at that slide, am I misinterpreting that?
Councilmember Aceves, yes. I mean, the purpose of this slide is to say that if you were to go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes with doing no other mitigations,
Okay.
then that's what you would get.
Okay, so that leads me to the second question, that is, couldn't you do mitigations on the 4 lanes and solve the issues you're trying to solve with the 2 lanes?
Madam Mayor,
Like the no
Council-
left turn signs, the speed enforcement, and the parking enforcement.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Aceves, there are aspects that could be achieved with 4 lanes and doing some of those mitigations. However, the parking, which was one of the issues, would no longer be an issue, and speeding or would not be addressed, and speeding also would be difficult to address as well.
Okay, on page 8, you showed 9% accidents were pedestrian and bike-related. I asked staff earlier, we couldn't get the primary collision factor of what the causation of these, or do we know the primary collision factors? And of this 9%, which ones were bike only?
Councilmember Aceves, let's see. I'm showing a vehicle involved with bike at actually 21 of them. Yes. But I don't have the primary collision, excuse me, I don't have the primary collision factors for just the bike collisions. I just have aggregate primary collision factors overall.
Mayor Perotti, Councilmember Aceves, in the analysis of the collisions, we took the collision reports that we had from the Sheriff's Department and used the primary collision factors, summarized those in a table. What we'd really have to do is go through all 88 or so collision reports, and in there, there's responses from drivers, witnesses, even written statements from the investigating officers. And what you'd really have to do to figure that out is go through each one of those collision reports and look for that information within all the other data that's in the collision reports. So I think what we relied on for this and our summary is that a collision report also includes a sort of a checkbox system that is performed by the investigating officers that list the main factors, and we summarized those main factors.
Okay, but Mr. Eberling, don't we do that on a routine basis every time an accident comes in to find out if we have a problematic intersection and have our law enforcement people address it? I mean, isn't that kind of a normal course of action?
Mayor Perotti, Councilmember Aceves, in general, yes. When we endeavor to get the collision reports as soon as possible after they're produced by the Sheriff's Department, and then our traffic engineering team looks at those and looks at them for any issues that we think were roadway related, safety improvement related to the roads, that kind of thing. And if there were something where we started to see a pattern or that kind of thing in a particular location, our traffic engineering team would start to do that. However, with all that being said, as you are aware, I think that we did just create a traffic operations and maintenance division of Public Works, and we're more trying to formalize that approach to things and improve our organizational approach to this. So while that does occur, I would say in the past it had been done more on a sort of ad hoc basis, and we are formalizing it with how I'm upgrading and organizing the department. And that's one of the main purposes of that organizational task.
Okay. I have two final questions, and then I'll probably have some more after public comment. The first one has to do, you did a peak hour evaluation of when the most traffic comes through, the peak hours. I think you had, I can't remember what the number was. Was there a comparison or a comparative with the peak hour on the freeway and the peak hour on Hollister? And were they about the same?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Aceves, we did not examine a comparison between peak hours on the 101 and peak hour in Old Town. However, the peak hour generally occurs at similar times, usually 5:30 to 6:30, and if they were different at all, it would be imperceptible to most drivers.
Well, and the reason for my question is if there's an issue, like traffic blocks, back up on the freeway, they're going to go to either Kyrie, or they're either going to go to Hollister, maybe ferry to Cairo, but most likely Cathedral Oaks. So those need to be evaluated to find out the direct causation or the direct cause of going from 4 to 2 lanes, especially during an emergency. The one thing that, well, let me ask this, and I don't know if staff can answer it, because I think I know the answer, is that, what's the evacuation plan for Old Town?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Sevas, I want to go back to your first statement, or your first question real quick. Congestion on 101 in general does occur in the morning peak hours and the afternoon peak hours. And what we mean by peak hours is that statistically, traffic engineers know across the country that the morning peak hours typically between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., that 2-hour period, and the evening peak hours between 4 and 6 p.m. Then when we refer to the actual peak hour, what we do is we look at the traffic counts for those within those 2-hour periods, both in the morning and evening, and determine what the actual peak hour is. But when we do 24-hour counts, it's just statistically has worked out across the country that those 2 hours, those 2 sets of 2 hours are when all the peak hours occur. If there were to be some large-scale congestion on 101, some sort of failure, the roadway's closed temporarily, there was maybe a major collision where people were offloading into the city. Even today, right now, that overwhelms our network, even with 4 lanes. So fortunately, those things don't occur very often. They're rare, and we don't actually engineer or plan for that. We know that they're going to occur. They'll have to resolve themselves as the roadway, as for example, as 101 gets cleared and the traffic starts moving again. That is common. I mean, it does occur maybe once or twice a year in this area, sometimes a little more often, sometimes a little less often. But that is not something we're going to design to that ultimate configuration. We're going to design to the traffic of a normal day. The next thing is you asked about evacuation routes. In the many years I've been doing this, I've asked this question of both police and fire, sheriff's departments, CHP departments, and fire departments, and I've been experienced around many concerned citizens asking the same question. And the response that I've always gotten is that the sheriff departments and the police departments and the fire departments do not plan evacuation routes. And the reason why is that we don't know where the emergency is going to be. If we happen to plan an evacuation route for Old Town, say that we said everybody needs to go to Hollister, then to Fairview, and then to 101, great. We've now defined an evacuation route, except that what happens with the emergency was a train derailment right underneath Fairview. So we don't want to send the public in a sort of pre-planned way to where we may or may not know where the emergency is. So what we do is what the police, fire, and public works often gets involved in is dealing with emergencies as they happen, and then we route the public where they need to go to get away from the emergency.
Okay. I understand it's the type of emergency, but also the emergency plan identifies critical locations that we have to address during an emergency. I mean, the availability to get to the hospital, the response to our rest home, where our schools are located. All that's part of an operational plan that the fire and police would have. Okay,
Absolutely.
my final question, Mr. Early, I had found it really interesting the discussion earlier about the asphalt. Hollister used to be the freeway. And once you start grinding, you're going to find concrete throughout the entire run of Hollister Avenue. How does that impact your operation?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Sevas, it's likely that the overlays have been done on the roadway for many years. The thickness of the asphalt is significantly above the old concrete asphalt where it does exist. And our overlay will only go down around 4 inches, depending on our ultimate design. So we likely will not get into it. If we get into some areas where we do have to grind concrete, while it can make the contractor have to change out some heads on their grinders, that kind of thing, to different styles, we can actually grind the concrete. So that will be something we're aware of, and if we do encounter it, we'll be able to deal with it.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here real quick, just to kind of address a couple, one question that Councilmember Seves had about the meeting at the community center. Were there any residents from Old Town? And I got there late to the meeting, so I don't know how many were there before me, but there were residents that got up and spoke in favor for their children's sake, for their family's sake, that they do ride their bikes. So I can't say how many, but there were residents that did speak to it. But I also wanted to comment on the concerns. You've really done an excellent job, staff, of addressing a lot of the emails and the concerns that we've received, and I appreciate that. Thank you. One concern that I've heard that I'm not sure if I read anything about it, but was expressed about possibly going through neighborhoods as an alternate route if it's congested. I find that difficult to think that that would be an alternative, just because of the layout of Old Town. Could you address that in some way?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, yes, and this was something that came up during the community meeting as well. And yes, you and I, knowing the street network and how discontinuous it is through, and really that's part of the reason why the Eckwell project is what it is, because there are no real convenient direct routes, parallel routes, other than the freeway and now Eckwell. However, I do see some merit to the concern for the folks that don't know the area very well and are think that they're entering a grid system and that they're going to bypass. Now, obviously, I think that's the minority of folks that would be in Old Town. However, I see, a rationale behind their concern. Now, to address that, we have collected quite a bit of data, some baseline data in the neighborhoods to be able to compare to future data, to be able to know whether we're seeing increases in the neighborhoods for whatever reason, and being able to maybe diagnose that and address it. I do think while the concern, if you're a resident there, it's a valid concern. I think it's going to be, one, the minority of a very small minority of folks that might try to do that, and two, I think if it is anyone that is local and is trying to do that, they'll quickly realize that they're not saving that much time. But be that as it may, we have the data to be able to compare to future data to determine and quantify a problem if there is one.
And my second question is a couple residents I've asked about having an end date. And and I'm suggesting, and I think I've heard Councilmember Richards as well, do an evaluation, like what's it look like after. It's going to take some while to get that, people used to it, but after maybe 6 months, take a look at it. After a year, not put an end date, but more of an update on how is it going. Will there need any tweaking? That's what you have planned?
Mayor Perotti, that's certainly your prerogative to ask us for that, and we do, Public Works does like to bring projects back and talk about how they're performing, so I think that we can do it either way. We can certainly take direction from the City Council and have some sort of plan, or we can monitor it and bring it back when we see things are either operating great or we see some issues, and we can bring it back for you. So I would leave it up to the council and your prerogative, but we'd be happy to bring it back to let you know what's happening.
Thank you. Okay, Council Member or Mayor Pro Tem Kasdan.
Thank you. Just two small questions. One is, we talked about the impacts on bicycles, in which there's now a lane and a buffer. What about, how will this affect safety with respect to pedestrians?
Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Kasdan, it's actually an important question because this was something that actually came up during the community meeting. And there has been a lot of talk about the benefits to speed and bikes, because bikes will have a place. But also, what this does for pedestrians is it really reduces the exposure of pedestrians to traffic. And I think I used the example in the community meeting. On a 4-lane road, if you put your foot out off the curb and the driver right next to the parked vehicle stops, you inch your way out and you lean over and look into that next lane to see if the other car knows why that car stopped, or if they're just going to keep barreling by. You don't have that issue when you reduce the number of lanes. So it really does improve the conditions for pedestrians, both in the exposure to multiple lanes and then also not have this situation where you're potentially hidden behind a stopped vehicle and entering into the next lane. So those are the two primary advantages to pedestrians.
And one last question. A lot of what we received were from businesses, the concerns of businesses. And so this is for Mr. Valdez. In the past, we've had many analyses, economic development studies, and I remember in the community center, people putting Post-it notes on the wall about what are their biggest interests and so forth. So what is it that we've heard from businesses in the past as far as what their concerns, what their needs would be, and how, to the extent that this might be at least recognizing they have legitimate concerns about congestion and so forth, but this is also attacking or getting at some of the concerns and the goals that they had in mind in previous meetings.
Sure, and I'll just generalize very briefly. One of the main concerns our businesses in Old Town had were on the number of parking spaces available to their patrons, visitors to Old Town, the length of time that would be available to them, and then that cycling, right? Could they move on and be done? Most of that really centered around those businesses that don't have their own lots or their lots aren't easily accessible from side streets. So as Mr. Rapp mentioned, you might have a business that has a parking lot behind it, but it's 4 businesses into the block. And so you have to go past 3 other businesses to get there. Some of the conditions of those parking lots could use a lot of help, or sometimes are used for their own employees. So major concerns was, are we making Old Town inviting? And by doing so, do people have places to park? What one of those studies found is that the perception about the number of parking spots is kind of off, in the sense that people will think that they've been circling for minutes and minutes, and it's actually been 1 minute or 2 minutes. But people like to park as close as they can to their ultimate destination. So I would say that our more vocal businesses have just talked about really increasing parking and making it as easy as possible for people to visit and shop down there. The other things come in line are safety and visibility, just being able to walk around and being able to see things well.
Yeah, with respect to that last point, the sort of slowing down and walkability, that was one of the goals as well?
Yeah, because of what's often been brought up in terms of economic development and then also placemaking is the desire to actually be able to walk, enjoy, as opposed to it being somewhat more transactional, like I'm going to one specific business to do my business there and then I'm gone, versus you might decide to stay there for a little bit, maybe grab a coffee, maybe go grab lunch, and then it becomes the idea of spending more time, and maybe there's an additional interaction that may not have occurred because you saw a shop there that piqued your interest.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kiriakou.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can we go back to the slide that had some of the safety data That's the one. No, go back, the one with the percentages, the state, the compared to the state.
Oh, sorry.
I think you just passed it. Okay, oh, sorry, that is the right one. So 4% of the state average, when I saw, for collisions, when I saw that at the workshop, it kind of knocked me back. How long have we known that this stretch of Hollister is this comparatively unsafe, not just for people who are on a bicycle or on foot, but in cars? How long, I mean, is this newer information? Is this older information? How long has this information been available to us?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Kiriakou, I think that that information became clearer as we've gone through this process. Obviously, we looked back 5 years in the data, but I think one of the things I actually wanted to say about this project is, as we've gone through this process, it's become clearer and clearer that this is a, not only do we have the other goals, but this is really a safety improvement project. I think I want to make sure we're very careful about how we talk about it. I think the roadway does operate in many ways very safely. However, we do have the data, and we do have the comparison to average roads around the state of this type, and our collision rate is 4 times the rate of other similar roadways in the state. So I think that that's something where what we want to say is this: there are definitely room for safety improvements to this road. And I think that became clearer and clearer as we went through this process, and I think that's very important to think about.
Thank you. And there's been a lot of great questions asked already, so I don't want to ask a whole bunch more, but I do want to ask a couple. And one of them, I want to kind of go back to a point that Councilmember Aceves made. Can you go to that slide that had the 2 different gradings of the roadway? One as it functions now, and another if you just reduced it down to 2 lanes but did nothing else. So when we were on this slide, Councilmember Aceves kind of brought forward a scenario, which was, well, why couldn't we just do 2 lanes in each direction, still have some bike lanes? And I don't want to mischaracterize what he said, but I think, have a median so that you are restricting some of the left turns some of the time to reduce the conflicts. And I think this kind of puts into sharp relief for me how long we've been at this, because to me, that's option A from 2017, 2018. I was out there, and I was at the community center as a member of the public, and that was one of the 3 choices. It was sort of like the no project alternative because it had some beautification in the medians, but it didn't do a lot to change conditions from a driver's perspective, with one very important exception, which was that scenario got rid of all of the parallel parking, all of it, every single spot on the south side of Hollister. So no more parking in front of Larry's Auto Parts, no more parking in front of Noodle City or Old Town Coffee, no more parking out in front of Santa Cruz Market or the Habit or any place else. And I think for a lot of people, that was just kind of a deal killer. And I think that's one of the reasons other alternatives received more support. What did I want to ask? But so that brings us to parking. So it's been suggested by some that what we really ought to do is just, and not up here tonight, but others in the community, it's been suggested that we should just go down to 2 lanes each way, have a median in the middle lane, and let's just acquire a parking lot. Let's just spend the money, purchase some property somewhere, either on Hollister or off Hollister, and build a big honkin' parking lot. So I guess my first question about that is, how much would that reasonably be expected to cost?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Kiriakou, if you'll let me, I want to go back to one of your earlier comments real quickly. Just that we have to remember that this corridor is highly constrained, that with this project, we're not changing any hardscape, curb, gutter, or sidewalk. So with that constraint, you are correct in what you said, that if we were to keep it at 2 lanes in each direction, but try to have the bike lanes as well, it would be a trade-off, and likely something else would have to go away, such as parking. So it's exactly. Also, I think that, as was mentioned earlier, the one lane in each direction is a significant safety improvement for pedestrians. So that aspect or goal would also not be met by doing that. Lastly, your question about parking lots. A typical parking structure, they're very expensive. Just as off the top of my head, you'd be looking at somewhere between a $20 to $50 million structure, and you would have to find the land to build it on, which there are no vacant lots in Old Town. So likely we would have to either find an amenable seller, or we'd have to condemn somewhere to obtain the property. So I think, and that would actually add to that cost. So we're talking many tens of millions to build a parking structure.
And then just to kind of peel the onion back a little bit further, isn't the state right now trying to do everything within their power to compel cities to turn existing parking lots that are publicly controlled into housing?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Kiriakou, that's above my pay grade, but
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I'll take you at your word of that.
Okay. And then wasn't there just legislation passed? This is really more of a jump ball, whoever wants to take it. I think Newshawk just wrote an article about it, though. Didn't the state just pass legislation that basically mandates that for a future development, you cannot have a parking requirement if it's anywhere near transit? And of course, anything on Hollister is near transit. It's a major bus corridor.
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Kiriakou, again, I'll have to beg your forgiveness and say that that's a little bit out of my league. That's the planning
Maybe someone
department,
can
and
ask
I'm sure our
Okay.
planning director, Peter Imhoff, is on that and would be able to answer it.
Okay.
I'll make an attempt. It's still a deferral. But I'll make an attempt. Madam Mayor and Councilmember Kiriakou, there's numerous housing bills, and we're still studying them. Our city attorney's been studying them. Peter's been studying them. And so we've had some conversations internally about kind of what we see as kind of the cumulative impacts and how these are going to affect us. And it's probably too soon to tell. But what we started to lean towards was maybe coming to the council with a presentation on all these housing bills and what we see in the future. So I'm making a note of it. We don't have the answers today, but the point is taken that there are bills that do things like was just mentioned in terms of taking away local control from cities on planning and zoning with regard to housing and parking, et cetera. So we will package something together and put that on a future agenda.
Yeah, I believe AB 2097 removes the minimum parking requirements for housing and commercial projects within a half-mile of transit stops. So,
Councilmember Kiriakou, I will just confirm it is AB 2097 that you're talking about. We have to evaluate the transit stop to determine if it qualifies under the act. Not all transit stops do, but you are correct that is a big shift for us as a result of AB 2097.
okay. So basically, parking is going to be harder to come by and a lot more expensive and a lot harder to require. Okay, I've got it. Thank you.
Well, I really want to go to the public. You've been waiting a long time, and I promised I'd get to you earlier, but we had a lot of questions. So I'm going to open the public hearing at this point and entertain, asking for speakers they have 3 minutes.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the Zoom app, if you can please use the raise hand feature. Just for the record, I do have 11 paper speaker slips and then 3 that wish to play a video.
Okay.
And so would you like me to proceed with the Zoom or with the paper speaker slips?
Let's do the speakers that are here.
Okay. So our first speaker would be Heather Deutsch.
To change my glasses these days. So thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Heather Deutsch. I'm the executive director of Move Santa Barbara County, representing thousands of Goleta residents who support our organization, but also would like to see a safer Goleta for walking and bicycling. So there are a multitude of reasons to support this project. I will touch on 2 and address a question that has been noted by many. This project should be supported because everyone, regardless of how they choose to travel, should be able to do so safely. Downtown Goleta, unfortunately, does not benefit from a network of streets, as has been noted. Hollister Avenue is the east-west connection, and this design makes significant steps by providing bike lanes and reducing by over 50% the number of lanes pedestrians need to cross. So we were talking about multiple threats, but also this concept of pedestrian exposure, which represents the length of time that pedestrians are exposed to be hit and injured or killed by people driving. This project should be supported for the sake of economic development. Cars don't shop, people do. Study after study has shown that an increase in pedestrian and bicycle access and safety in commercial areas leads to increases in retail sales and economic growth. And then in terms of the question, so where will the cars go? There is a widely studied but little reported phenomenon called induced demand. It's sort of like a hungry stomach. One continues to eat until one is full and then one stops. And the bigger the stomach, the more food is found to fill it. Similarly, the smaller the stomach, the less food is needed. So you could make the decision to keep Hollister Avenue as it is because of the amount of traffic. But it will continue to fill, and maybe you will decide to widen it further. First the sidewalks go, next you'll tear down the commercial buildings, which would not be unusual. We see 7, 9, 11 lane roads becoming the norm across the country, and yet there is still traffic congestion. The only thing that actually works is providing options for people to walk, bicycle, and take transit, which moves far more people in far less space. It costs less, it is better for business, and it recognizes that everyone deserves a safe place to travel, regardless of how they choose to get there. Please support this project and allow it to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is Richard Foster. However, I don't think I see him here anymore. Our next speaker is Armando Rios.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So I also work with MOVE Santa Barbara County, and I am an education and encouragement coordinator. I've been tasked with identifying barriers that prevent families from walking and biking to school. So Old Town is home to La Patera and Kellogg school families, and Hollister has been a known barrier for families walking or biking safely to their school. It keeps people from doing so. With its high speeds of traffic, I did the math and it was about, what was it, like 6 cars per hour going over 40, I believe. And so that's 6 cars who can injure a bicyclist or pedestrian crossing Hollister. The reason why you should support this is because the time of pedestrian exposure. My apologies, I'm just speaking, no prepared notes. I applaud that the restriping will lower the speeds, and it's a good step in that direction to lower speeds of vehicles. And instead of crossing as many lanes now, by narrowing the street, you will lower the speeds. Bicyclists and parking, there's still conflict in that with the backing up, but there'll be visibility, and I'm glad to hear there's going to be conflict striping. And let's see. Yeah, I support this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Robert Bernstein, followed by Alex Pujo.
Well, thank you. I represent the Sierra Club, and I've lived in Goleta for 40 years. I've been going to these meetings about reconfiguring Old Town Goleta for about 30 years, and I think we're almost there. I think tonight is going to be the night. It has to be, because I gave up going to the most amazing Halloween party that's taking place right now on State Street to be here. And I thank Councilmember Kiriakou and anybody else who was involved in expediting this process and making tonight be the night where you're going to decide and direct council to move, direct Public Works to move forward on this. So without further ado, just make it tonight. It's done. Get it done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Alex Pouchot. I was one of the founding members of the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation with Robert, I believe, when we finally incorporated in 2001. I believe in those days we're dealing with GOTAC, the Goleta Old Town Advisory Committee. That's way before Goleta was incorporated. Those days we didn't have safe routes to school or complete streets or Vision Zero. Things change. I'm not a Goleta resident, so I'm not going to get into the specifics of this road diet, but I noticed that you're very careful about, fire, police, emergencies, evacuations, and so forth. But the road diets I'm familiar with, and there are so many in the South Coast, have been not just successful, but extremely successful. For instance, Cliff Drive in Santa Barbara, the upper end of Milpa Street from 4 to 2, Cliff Drive from 5 to 3, the lowest part, the portion of State Street, first south of this freeway from 4 lanes to 2, portions of Cabrillo Boulevard and the eastern end towards the zoo, also from 4 to 2 with diagonal parking. These things are really, really successful. Upper de la Vina, where I live, from 4 and 5 lanes to 3. And the road diets evolve. They don't stay the way they are. They get better and better and better because the businesses not just survive but thrive. And over the years, they get things happen, and I'm sure you move on to complete streets. But be aware that you have time to change the project, and it will get only better. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jason Chapman, followed by Julia Zhao.
Hello, Madam Mayor and City Council. I'm glad to see that the city is finally getting its values in order. You see, for far too long, the residents and visitors of Old Town, the downtown and heart of our city, have had their safety and comfort impinged upon. Far too long has the main street of one of our densest, liveliest, and most beloved places been treated as a highway rather than a main street. Old Town is a place, and it's a place where we want people to be comfortable, and grading it on how many vehicles you can put through is not the right way to grade it. It's clear that on Hollister, traffic, or the threat of traffic, has taken priority over the safety, health, and peace of mind of those in Old Town. And besides that, the city has gotten smarter about transportation. A transportation network is a complicated thing, made of imperfect people making decisions every day. It's not like pipes whose flow is determined by their size and the number of people. It's very complicated. We mentioned the comments about induced demand. In addition, lower speeds mean less collisions. If we're concerned about level of service and we're concerned about people getting through, I would imagine with all the harm that comes with collisions, it also causes delays. It's been found again and again that often when you reduce speeds, you actually can increase the average speed by basically reducing the amount of incidents. So we may find that the traffic situation is even better than we thought. And finally, when you stop designing around driving as the default and start giving people other options that are just as comfortable, just as convenient, just as practical, they will take those options. And when you have people opting to walk, bike, and take transit or any combination of those things instead of driving, that means less cars on the road. That is a solution to congestion. When people get to Old Town without a car, they don't need a parking spot. So there's another solution to the parking problem. We need to always keep that in mind. And that is one thing too, is that we should also consider adding some bike parking to this. You can fit, I think, up to 10 bikes in one single car parking spot. So, we could be a lot more space efficient in that way. For far too long, Goleta has been built around not only driving as a default, but in many places, the requirement, because it's just not safe or practical to do otherwise. But finally, we're doing things different. For far too long, Goleta has had its values backwards and valued traffic over the health and safety of our residents. But finally, we're doing things in line with what we really value. Please get this project going, and please get it going as soon as you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Julia Zhao, followed by Don Lubach.
Hi, everybody. I am a current resident of Old Town Goleta. I live just at the end in the La Goleta neighborhood, which I have loved, just because I can bike and walk and transit to pretty much everywhere that I need to go, including my daily commute. I will say it's kind of an interesting commute, especially the area that we're concerned about, Hollister. So I'd like to take you through a little bit of my mental math on the daily. Which I think every bicyclist and pedestrian who goes through Old Town can relate to, in that we have our favorite places to cross. We have our favorite places to make a left turn that are slightly less dangerous. I did also feel very validated in listening to this report, in that all of the intersections identified as dangerous are the ones that I'm the most worried about as a bicyclist. So that felt very nice. So I'm really glad to hear that you guys are addressing this. But I mean, as I pull out of my neighborhood, I come across Hollister and Kellogg, and I make a decision there whether I should make a U-turn and get onto Ward Drive to go on the Auburn Trail, which overall is just a much more pleasant experience because it's totally protected, or whether I should forego crossing because there's a lot of off-put traffic coming off of the 217. Sometimes it's very dangerous for me to cross on a bike. So sometimes I continue on to Fairview, but that also takes me through this whole entire area. And then I start to encounter problems with especially looking past parked cars and seeing trucks and SUVs and cars coming off of side streets and potentially sideswiping me as they turn onto Hollister. So that is actually one of my main concerns about the back and angled parking, in that near intersections that would decrease visibility potentially for cars turning onto Hollister and coming into conflict with bicyclists that maybe they won't be able to see. So I urge you to think about that a little bit. But overall, I think the experience biking and walking on Hollister will be much better. I do also really appreciate some attention to the traffic signals. As a pedestrian, it's maddening to sit at Hollister and Kellogg for 2 minutes because I did not make the cutoff to hit the walk signal button in time. So I just sit there and I contemplate my life and my life decisions as I'm like, oh, do I want to jaywalk here, or do I be a good little Old Town resident and sit and wait for like 2 or 3 minutes? So thank you, and thank you so much for this plan.
Thank you.
And next is Don Lubach, followed by Larry Bickford.
Mayor Perotti and members of the council. I just wanted to start by saying I love Old Town Goleta. I remember my first time I met Old Town. It was 40 years ago. Someone at UCSB said there's this place called Rockpile Records near the Habit, and you've got to go. They've got the new rare Clash album. So I bicycled on my Schwinn Varsity into Old Town Goleta, and it's a wonderful memory. And when you love something, you want it to be better, or someone, you know how they can be better. And about 25 years ago, I was so thrilled when one of the top transportation advocates in the world, Dan Burden, showed up because of this meeting that Alex was referring to. So suddenly I was in a room with Robert Bernstein and Alex and Johnny Wallace, and we had walked all morning through Old Town Goleta with Dan Burden, who looks like a Dr. Seuss character. And he after this morning walk, he took a nap, which I thought was really eccentric. And then in the afternoon, we all gathered at the Goleta Valley Community Center, and he made recommendations on how Old Town Goleta could be better. He said, put the road on a diet, go with 2 lanes. Consider reverse parallel parking, which I'd never heard of before, and that was one of the main recommendations. And he talked about how it could be so much better, and he overlaid the many photos that he took that morning with some of these ideas that he had. And why I'm so excited to be here, and Robert Bernstein said it so well, I think we're going to witness tonight the council moving those ideas forward from only 25 years ago or so. And I'm so excited to be part of all of that. I love Old Town Goleta. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Larry Bickford, followed by Kira Fuchs.
Hi, my name is Larry Bickford. I do not live in Old Town Goleta, but I frequently drive through there, walk through there, have coffee there, play pickleball there. And I've been as a pedestrian and as a bicyclist. And I got to tell you, my last experience as a bicyclist was about a week and a half ago. Bicycling down Fairview Avenue, making a left turn onto Hollister on my way to Goleta Valley Community Center. I was almost hit by a car running a red light at Fairview and Hollister and run off the road at Magnolia on my way to play pickleball, which I didn't play because I was a bit shook up from that experience. It doesn't have to be that way. I was going to ask you, but I'm sure you already have this information. You know exactly how many parking spaces are going to be created by the back-end diagonal parking. I've never been a fan of back-end diagonal parking. It confuses me. It confused me down at East Beach, confused me when I went to Pacific Grove in Monterey and had to experience that. But, you know, the confusion doesn't last long, and then you get to appreciate the fact that it's not a bad thing. There's more parking space. It's not that tough. Bicyclists can get by. It's a good thing. So the bottom line is that ultimately there'll be more parking, which will help with the economic vitality of Old Town. And there'll be less vehicle collisions and pedestrian and bicycle accidents. What is not to like about this plan? We've been talking about this plan and other plans for 35 years. It's time to make it happen. Please, could you do it? Could you make the right decision and move forward? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next is Kira Fuchs, followed by Roman Baratiak.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kira Push. I'm a grad student at UCSB. So I bike to campus a lot of the time. I actually live in the Nolita area near the In-N-Out. And I just wanted to say that a lot of my friends, I've encouraged them to bike, and many of them have bikes and want to bike, but live in the area and are discouraged by the lack of bike lanes or what they perceive to be unsafe streets through Old Town. I also wanted to say that I work at the VeloPro bike shop part-time as a mechanic, just over in Old Town, and we offer a service called a safety check, and it's $35, and we actually get a lot of requests for them. Customers will come in and they'll say, I had an accident, I was hit by a car, and I want to just make sure that everything on the bike is still working. So we offer that service, and we actually get asked for it a lot. And I was very surprised when I first started working there because I was hearing about all these accidents all of a sudden. And now it's just kind of a part of my everyday life. And I talk to these people who ask for service checks, and a lot of the near collisions or collisions happen in Old Town. I myself have also had a few close calls. And as it's been said, it doesn't have to be this way. This restriping project can make a lot of people safer. I just wanted to quickly mention some stats also. Because they shorten crossing distances, control turning conflicts, and reduce traffic weaving, New York City's bike lanes reduced injury rates for people walking on their streets by 12 to 52%. In New York City in 2011, after they installed a bike lane on Columbus Avenue, bicycling increased 56% on weekdays, crashes decreased 34%, speeding decreased, sidewalk riding decreased, and traffic flow remained similar. Likewise, after the construction of a protected bike lane on 9th Avenue, local businesses saw a 49% increase in retail sales. On other streets in the borough, the average increase was only 3%. Jumping to Austin, Texas, by shifting traffic from cars to bikes and making it easier to reach transit stops, Austin's planned bike lane network is projected to increase the city's traffic capacity by about 25,000 trips per day as a direct result of increased mobility and access by bicycle and by foot. So I just wanted to say placemaking was mentioned. We have the opportunity now to make Old Town a place to arrive at and spend time in rather than just drive through. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next, we have Roman Baratiak, followed by Nathan Harmony.
Hello, thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I appreciate that very much. I want to compliment the staff, which is, I know, put in hours and hours of work on this. I appreciate all of the outreach to the community, the ability to actually respond. I want to thank the council for really excellent questions. And just want to say I'm a 48-year South Coast resident. Many of those years were spent living here in Goleta. I live near Goleta Valley Junior High. I've ridden on the roads in this area for the entire time that I've been here, all 48 years. I've spent a lot of time going through Old Town Goleta. At one point, Amsterdam was congested and you couldn't move because of all of the car congestion. They made a concerted effort to change what was happening in that city, and it has become a model for safety in regards to bicyclists and pedestrians. The same can be happening here. We have handed over so much of our precious space to the automobile. We talk about a parking structure, we're talking about $20 million, $30 million. We have put cars ahead of just human happiness, frankly. I mean, we need cars, there's no doubt about it, but they should not be number one on our agenda all the time. This project in Old Town is important for its safety issues. I want to see kids out riding their bikes. I want to see people walking on sidewalks that actually accommodate them. If somebody is in a car and they have to wait 10 seconds or 15 seconds longer, so what? Enjoy the time and think about, what you have to do the rest of the day. Anecdotal, I was coming back, I can ride from my house to the airport, which I do. I just put my roll-up bag in my basket. I go to the airport, I take off, I come back, I ride my bike, I go home. The only time I was in an accident was coming back from the airport, trying to get to Goleta Valley, where I live, by Goleta Valley Junior High, and a car came through a stop sign and hit us. I would have been on my bike, but a colleague that I was traveling with took us in a car. Whatever happens with Old Town, let's move forward with this project, but let's tackle Fairview, which is not safe for cyclists or pedestrians. It's a real problem getting from Hollister to the Fairview Center. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Nathan Harmony.
So I live in Old Town Goleta. I own a house off Orange. I have 3 young kids, ages 4. My second just turned 3, and I've got a 1-year-old. So we do a lot of walks around the neighborhood. Super thankful for the sidewalks. So much better than it used to be. Hollister just doesn't feel safe for me with my kids just walking. And then I wanted to talk about my son Dane, who just turned 3. We had his birthday party at Tucker's Grove. It was a fire truck themed birthday party. We did pin the fire truck wheel on the fire truck. We had a bounce house. We got little fire extinguishers to we put in little tea lights and they put out the fires. And then we had a fire truck piñata that we got from the piñata store in Old Town Goleta. Now, we had to order it. It was a special order. When I went to go pick it up, I said, Dane, it's here. Let's go get your fire truck. So I luckily got a spot on Hollister, the piñata store across from, what I'm talking about. Okay. So, I didn't think about how dangerous it would be to get him out of the car seat. It just didn't occur to me. And so, when I parked on Hollister, it was kind of like the 5 o'clock hour, cars going back and forth, and it's like, okay, I got to get him out of the car seat. And then, I wait for a break, open the door, yank him out, pull him out, and then we go into the store, and then we come back. I said, well, I'm going to have you going on the other side. And I go to open the door, donk. Why can't the door open? Because the curb is this high. And so that's an issue that nobody's talked about. Thought I'd bring it up. I've also, I often ride my bike to go get groceries. I've had there's no bike lane on Hollister, and I've had a truck just whiz by my ear, and I just it's really unsafe. I'm super thankful for this. I'm in full support. I live in Old Town. I'm a resident, homeowner. I hope you move forward. So, thanks.
Thank you.
And next, if you can, should we move to Zoom first and then play the video?
Sure.
Okay. We have Michael Isa. If you can please unmute yourself.
Hi. My name is Michael Isa, and I've been a resident of Goleta for many years. And I don't, I want to share all the community meetings and public speaking meetings that I've attended to try to make Old Town a safe place to walk, bike, and drive your car. And I want to first, give lots of thanks to Public Works. I think they've done a really great job here in addressing all the issues. Let me just say, first and foremost, what I said at the latest community meeting is, I love this project. I love this project because it has bike lanes. I love the parking. I love that you're going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And like I said then, I love this project, not because it's perfect, because it's not, but because I know this project is so much better than what we have now. And I know this project is going to save lives because all of the things that were put in place are there to save lives. And I fully support this project, and I want to celebrate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are any other members of the public wishing to speak, would you please use the raise hand feature, and I will call on you. We have Robin Cederloff.
Good evening, Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Uh-oh. We've lost her.
Ms. Cederloff, if you can please unmute yourself.
Ready? There. Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry about that. I agree that, this is an important project. Safety is something that needs to be considered on Hollister. My biggest point I want to make is that I think doing an interim striping is a good idea, but I think it's putting the cart before the horse. I think we really need to get some of these other street projects done, like Elkwall, and then see what's going on Hollister. I would also like to suggest considering some of the larger side streets, making them one way with only one lane and putting the angle parking off Hollister. And then maybe you can have only Hollister parking for, pick up, drop off, 20 minutes, something along those lines. And that might help keep things moving a little bit better. Parking, of course, is an issue. And I'm wondering if the council has ever given any consideration to offering businesses that have parking lots some kind of financial incentive to allow other customers in the area to use their lot, kind of a corporate government shared project. I really think if we can get more parking off Hollister and onto the side streets, because Hollister just isn't that long, but most people don't mind walking unless they have to just do a quick run in and run out type pickup service. And I'm curious to know how you're going to handle the educational process in cluing people in as to how a lot of this works. Again, the 2 points I really want to make is let's get Elkwall done at least first before doing interim striping. Elkwall's going to take a lot of traffic off Hollister. And I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak? Would you please use the raise hand feature and I will call on you. I do not see any other responses.
Okay. So do we have a video?
Yes.
Mr. France, did you want to say a few words?
I could. Thank you, Deputy Clerk Campos, for queuing up this video produced 9 years ago. And thank you, Mayor Prodi, Council, and especially Council members Kiriakou and Richards for expediting this item. I may be the ghost of Christmas past, and I apologize for any rudeness in my prior comments. But there is a hope and excitement in this room, and I want to be in this room when this happens.
Thank you.
This is Crossing Hollister by Michael Montenegro from 2013.
There's a volume to it. There's a voiceover.
It's coming.
There you go. I'm a little worried.
I was like,
Should we take a 5-minute break? Should we take a 5-minute break?
I don't know if we need it.
I don't think that's it. It's in YouTube or Venmo.
Would you like us to take a 5-minute break, or?
We can
Okay.
do one or two.
Okay, 5-minute break. We'll be right back, don't leave. I think we're ready to do it, right?
Okay, our AV person will be taking control and
Okay.
starting the video.
Cross street with caution. Vehicles may not stop. Cross street with caution. Vehicles may not stop.
As a business owner, I don't think that it is the traffic necessarily on this street is destined for our businesses. I think that it is primarily a thoroughfare. I think people use it more as a highway than anything else.
You know, in my experience, driving through there, you see people on bikes kind of bobbing and weaving in and out of cars that are parked on the curb, and which is another potential highly dangerous situation, because not only when you're driving do you have to be aware of other vehicles that are driving through there, but then you have to deal with the people that are biking through there.
To see a lot of cars not fully stop at red lights or stop signs, which is really careless, because there's actually a lot of children here in Old Town, because this is a family community.
It was probably about 7:30. Sun had already gone down, and the lady, she was crossing the street with her child. Luckily, the child was in her arms. The lady on her way down, south on Hollister, struck the lady. She had her dog on her lap, was distracted by the dog or whatever she was doing, and actually drugged the lady about 15, 16 feet. Luckily, the kid wasn't hurt, and we were able to run out there and help out the lady, stop the car as it attempted to leave.
I could tell you, for example, in the last 3 years, we've had 2 young teen club members who got hit by a car crossing the crosswalk right here in front of the community center.
Tengo 4 años transitando la avenida Hollister. Todos los días lo hago en las mañanas para ir a trabajar.
Safety is extremely important to us, and it can also affect the reputation of what Old Town Goleta is trying to build. If one of our guests goes and gets hit or gets into an accident with a bike or car in Old Town Goleta, they're going to go back and they're going to tell their friends and family that Goleta is an unsafe place.
I feel kind of uneasy because, like I said, you don't know if the car is going to see you when you're going out there.
Support removing some of the heavy thoroughfare traffic and making it more of a street that is for accessing local businesses and for the residents who live here. There's a lot of residents in Old Town too. It's not just the businesses. That behind us there is an enormous amount of very dense housing. So it would make it safe for the families and the children, et cetera, in the area, especially when crossing the streets or riding bicycles, things such as this.
Thank you for that. Do we have any other speakers?
There are no additional speakers.
Okay. Okay, back to council, or does staff want to, the council have any questions of staff? Councilman Richards?
Thank you. Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say it's, rather telling that this film was 9 years old, and even at that point it had been, this issue has been studied for years since, before that. And still, we're getting comment letters, I'm sure you've all received them, that people are thinking that we're rushing this too much, and I want everyone to understand that this has been analyzed and studied, and this has a long history of us having workshops and collecting input and listening to people, and one of the letters that we got indicated that it's an erosion of the public trust when you're constantly asking for input and feedback from the community, and then not doing anything about it, and then just moving on and letting it sit and just letting it die. So I'm really glad that we are here tonight and that we are poised to take some action finally after decades of studying this. So I do have a few more questions that I wanted to ask staff, just to kind of further look at the plans and maybe ask some refining questions. So previously, when we had looked at this, I had suggested that it would be good to add a crosswalk at Magnolia. And I was wondering if you can put up a shot of the street and discuss whether or not that would be a possibility to add a crosswalk at that intersection, and how we might proceed with that.
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, we did look at what it would take to install a crosswalk at Magnolia. Magnolia is what would be called an offset intersection, so it's a very challenging intersection to install a crosswalk at. To get a crosswalk there, as we pull the picture up, there we go. And notice how the two minor street approaches don't line up with each other. So that's an offset intersection. And essentially what we'd have to do is install a crosswalk that would go from about where the corner where Larry's Auto Parts is, and then straight across. And to do that, we would likely have to do a lot of hardscape improvements. We would do curb extensions, we would have to make it ADA, and we would like to look at other turn constraints on Magnolia to make that crosswalk operate safely. So I think that level of design would take quite a while for Public Works to interject that into what we're doing already. And also it would cost a lot more, and I would guess very rough estimate somewhere between $500,000 to $750,000 more for this project to add that in because of the hardscape improvements. So I think you'd be looking at a significant delay to implementing the interim striping project, and a significant increase in cost. But eventually it could be done. And the last thing I'd say is that something like that, if it were to be added to our capital improvement program at the council's direction, would be something that might compete well for some of our local grants, like our Measure A grant program.
Okay, well, I don't want to do anything to hold the project up, but I would like to get support from my colleagues to add that, or at least consider adding that at a future date, because I think as someone who frequents that area a lot, I see a lot of people running across the street, and it seems like that would be something that would improve safety in that area. If we could put that, can you put that diagram back up? Because one of the other questions I had come up from I think Jason Chapman regarding more bicycle parking. So obviously we're trying to make this a more pedestrian bicycle friendly neighborhood area, and there is a dearth of parking for bicycles along this area, and part of it is that the sidewalks are very narrow, and it's hard to put a lot of bicycle parking or bicycle racks on the narrow sidewalks. So actually, can you go back to where it was? Because I wanted to ask a question. Would it be possible to use some of the red curb areas where there was parking or car parking and turn them into like little parklets or areas that bicycle parking? So if we're not going to use that for parking there, could it be used for bicycle parking? Or could we at least look into that? Because I want to make sure that at some point, and again, I understand maybe it's not a part of this project and maybe it gets looked at separately, but it is something that I think that would improve the project if we can add more bicycle parking.
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, I think that is something that we would want to look into after this project. And as a whole, Public Works is looking at the corridor to make a lot of just improvements from a maintenance standpoint. In the near future, we'll be installing some trees in the tree wells that are vacant. We're looking at some of the existing street furniture, such as news racks, that kind of thing, whether or not they're still being used. Just an overall a maintenance effort for Old Town that also includes, for example, pressure washing. We work with MTD recently to have the bus stop in front of the 7-Eleven pressure washed, for example. So I think increased attention to maintenance and how we might then look for opportunities to install bike racks, for example. And you are very correct that the sidewalks are narrow at this point, and we do have to watch out for pedestrian pathways, ADA pathways, that kind of thing. And then in particular, the one location in this graphic, we would likely not be able to install bike racks there because the purpose of that sort of empty area is for sight distance. And so we're putting in the red curb, and we're not allowing the angled parking to get closer to Magnolia to make the Magnolia intersection much, much safer. So that's part of the improvements to this corridor is those safety aspects, including for how cars operate. We want to make sure that people in cars, the drivers have a good view so that they are actually behaving in a safe manner. So I think while we certainly can look for areas, in that one particular instance, I would not recommend it.
Okay, well, I'll leave it up to the planners and the engineers to find locations, but I would like to strongly suggest that we try as much as we can to find as many bike parking areas as possible, because there really isn't any now. And if we're really expecting more bicyclists in this area, then we need to be prepared for that. If you could go further west in this diagram, because the other thing I wanted to up to Fairview, one of the other suggestions that I had was, so that if you're going west on Hollister and approaching that Fairview intersection, there is no bike lane at that point. And I know one of the bicycle improvements that has been suggested and used other places is a bike box, at least, something that when you're coming up to the intersection, it's a green marked area that indicates to people that there are bicycles that may be at that intersection. Is that something that has been considered or could be considered in this intersection?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Richards, that is something we can look into. The issue is that eventually with this project you have to get back to a 2 lanes in each direction format, and this is where to do it at Fairview because of the way the existing traffic signal functions. Also, the area is highly constrained. There isn't enough room to add in a traditional bike lane that would be between the right-hand through lane and the right turn lane where you'd normally see one. There just isn't space, and the lane widths there right now are already at the standard minimums. So a bike box at the head of one of those lanes certainly is something we can consider. And if I may, I'll take the moment to talk about next steps, because we actually didn't mention that, which is if this were to be approved this evening, Public Works would then go back with our consulting traffic engineer and our consulting designers to actually design the project, and then the next time the City Council would see the project is for us to request authorization to advertise the project. We would then advertise it for construction, and then the last time the City Council would see it before construction would be for the council to award the project. So from this point forward, we'd be doing the design effort, and many of these things, as we get into actual design, this is what you're seeing on screen is a conceptual design. as we move forward with actual design, we can look for those opportunities.
Okay. All right. That's all for my questions. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Kasdan.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I want to be clear that we think through what a plan would be to measure how we're doing, to measure success, and that kind of adaptive management approach. So to think about for a plan of monitoring how we're doing, like we've heard a number of letters asking about bike counts, for instance, so we know how many bikes hopefully are increasing and so forth. A speed of cars, we know we can do that and see how it's impacting the speed of cars, congestion and so forth. Another one too is to the extent that we can, and perhaps we could coordinate this with the Chamber of Commerce or other business entities, to survey businesses and see how they are affected. Is this something that has been beneficial? Are they benefiting from the parking and from the walkability sorts of things? Is that panning out? And to the extent that we get this data as we go along, we're able to make adjustments, for instance, and make, as you guys have pointed out along the way, we can make some. So I guess I'd like to see some of those things in a plan, and if necessary, for instance, when it comes to the budget cycle, if we need some additional money to pay for doing a plan and monitoring it, that we include that in the budget so we're prepared for this sort of thing. So it's a formal element of this project. And I think, this project is just perfectly suited for this sort of thing because it is paint. And we are learning as we go along, and we're going to improve it as we go along. And so in that sense, it's very exciting. So I thank you.
Councilmember Seves.
Okay. Mr. Eberlein, if you could just start with, we talked earlier about the word interim, that this is the first step of a multifaceted project. We're talking about high curbs that were a remnant of the floods that we used to get in Old Town, and that's why they were created that way, and they've never been reduced. And quite frankly, they're a hazard not only to pedestrians, but I banged my car there a few times trying to get out of the car. You mentioned the planners. I mean, there was a great video. It shows a beautiful palm tree. It's not there anymore. And many of the trees are gone. And we just have, holes in the sidewalk, which are a liability. But hopefully in time, we'll have tree plantings and beautify. I mean, I've lived in this community 40 years, and I've been waiting for something in Old Town for 40 years. I mean, I was here before I was a neighbor. I mean, I used to work the streets as a cop, and I mean, nothing's changed in all the years. In 40 years as a resident, I've been always looking for, in fact, when I first ran in 2006, this was like the #1 topic. What are we going to do to improve Old Town? We've done a great job with the sidewalks, but Old Town still looks like Old Town. So if you can spend a few minutes talking about what the interim means. I know you said that in 6 months after completion, you're going to do some analysis and come back, but it's just not an analysis of the striping. Isn't it an analysis of the entire needs of the Old Town corridor?
Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Seves, I think several things are happening within Old Town that are all very exciting. I think there's this proposal for this interim striping, and I think you're very correct that it is also a good way to consider it as a first step. There are things that will follow along. I also just mentioned what we're doing from a maintenance standpoint. I think that it's actually very important that we do some of those very basic maintenance activities like pressure washing the sidewalks, planting the trees and the tree vacancies, and even as we monitor utilities that do things in the area. As I've walked it several times, I've noticed that in the past, utilities have been allowed to dig up the sidewalk and then do some really ad hoc, awful-looking patch, not putting it back. making it look like an old, a downtown sidewalk with the score marks. So we want to make sure as we move forward that we're keeping an eye on all those little aspects, and we're watching over the utilities and how they affect things. And then from a roadway standpoint, which I mean the whole roadway, for everything from the curb, gutter, sidewalk, and the street itself, this isn't a first step, and we are continuing to look at taking the Complete Streets project or a variation thereof further with council's direction over the next few years. We can look for opportunities for grants and other things to move that type of project forward. And then ultimately also, it's my understanding that the planning department is looking at an Old Town visioning process. So I think that all of that together, a good way to put it is, for me, is I think it's an exciting time for Old Town, and that there is a lot going on from even the basic maintenance through to a visioning process that will potentially change the way or improve the way Old Town looks for the years to come.
And I'm looking forward to the visioning process. We've been waiting for that for a long time. But the other barrier, and maybe you can address this, I mean, this is a $1.2 million project that's fully funded. But it doesn't include those things that we just talked about. So there's going to have to be additional discussion, and you're going to come back to us with a prioritization of the capital improvement projects to find out if there's other monies that can be extrapolated, because right now, all you have is this interim. There isn't any money for anything else. So until we look at the capital improvement project reprioritization, it's going to be hard to find the much needed monies. But at the same time, we have to get ourselves, for lack of a better term, shovel ready for everything else, and to find out what it's going to cost us to reduce the size of the sidewalks as far as the height and the planters and everything, the signalized intersections. I mean, I know you have equipment for it, but there's going to be some additional cost in there that we haven't anticipated. But once we go out to bid, is there going to be enough money with what we have now? The bidding environment is very different post-COVID. So, the anticipation that the $1.2 million is enough, I think we have to think that it's not enough. And once it goes out to bid, see what that looks like. So I appreciate your comment as far as this is a first step, because it's going to require a lot more attention to get us to the final step, whatever that looks like. But we should at least think about what that is and then work to get there.
Councilmember Carriaco.
Before I ask a question, I just want to kind of walk some people who may not be from Old Town or in Old Town as much as other people through some recent changes, because it's not just sidewalks on 10 streets that didn't have any sidewalk before, and angled parking on Magnolia that wasn't there before. It's also Johnny D. Wallace Park. It's also the new sports field behind the community center. It's also the new public art project behind the community center, the mural in front of the community center, the 35 new parking spaces on Carson Street, the new green striping in front of the new bakery that's opening up, Oat Bakery in Old Town. There's a lot of things happening in Old Town right now, and it's one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative of our mayor, because we have a lot of projects also coming down the pike, not just this one, but Eckwell Fowler, Hollister Bridge. Part of Eckwell Fowler is the 217 roundabouts. I think there's a lot of things happening in Old Town. It's one of the reasons why I appreciated the mayor being willing to agree when we had our work plan meetings last April to move Old Town visioning up, because you can't move something up a priority list without moving something down the priority list. And something very important moved down the priority list to move up Old Town visioning. So I want to acknowledge that in this space, because this job is a lot of times about compromise. And there is compromise, and there's compromise from the cycling community happening in Old Town because they wanted a permanent project. They wanted a curb, gutter, and sidewalk version of the preferred complete streets alternative. They're not getting that. There's a lot of cyclists that have a lot of trepidation about roundabouts. I've heard cyclists call roundabouts meat grinders. There he is right there. So this isn't some bicycle boondoggle happening in Old Town. There's compromise. There's compromises being made for businesses to have more parking at a time when it's becoming more and more at a premium. There's compromises to make it safer for not just bicyclists, but also for pedestrians. And frankly, also for cars, because we saw the data. The data doesn't lie. It's not safe to drive a car in Old Town right now because you might bump into another car. So we have to address all these things, and it's going to require compromise, and it's going to require goodwill, and it's going to require a lot of community conversation. The Old Town visioning process is really important. Can staff just talk a little bit about what that is? Because we've referenced it a couple of times tonight, but I'm not sure the public really understands what that process is. Can you just walk us through it? And to any extent that it's multidisciplinary, not just planning, but the potential to have Public Works be a part of it and neighborhood services be a part of it, I think that might be really helpful for the community to understand.
Sure, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Kuroko, I'll make an attempt. And I did have a conversation with our Community Development Director, I think just yesterday about this. So with regard to the priority, first I'll say he does have a couple things on their list that are very important, one of which is the housing element. And so when I asked, well, what about timing? When do you see you getting the things that are in front of this done? You know, when do you think this would start? And he said probably summer of next year. So it kind of comes right on if this project moves forward, the heels of this project. And as Charlie said, becomes another part of the feedback loop as this project gets done and we start that process. So just adding that. It's definitely a planning process. Is it interdisciplinary? Yes. I mean, Public Works and Neighborhood Services for sure are involved, and it's a major visioning process, which implies long-term. So it is not, the tendency, I think, is when you do these is folks come out and people start to get into short-term conversations, and it happens, but planners are looking at it with probably a 20-year horizon. And so it is different than what we're talking about today. We're finally getting to this point where if this goes forward in less than a year, this project's going to be implemented. This visioning process is not that. It sets the stage for implementing projects down the road.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we note that in this space, because we've had some suggestions from members of the public that are urging us to slow down or saying we're rushing, or I know that may sound funny to some people, but we all do better when we all listen to each other and we all hear each other, right? And every piece of feedback, even negative, should be treated as a gift. And we heard a suggestion from Ms. Cedarloff tonight about, couldn't you go, one way on some of the side streets, and couldn't you put some green striping in certain places? Those are things that can be looked at through the Old Town visioning process at the same time or closely following getting the feedback on how this process is going. And it might inform that work, and it might ultimately lead to a better permanent project in Old Town. So I don't think even some of the criticisms that we've received from both Old Town residents and longtime Goleta residents should just be kind of chucked aside because we have a room packed full of supporters. I think we have to listen to everybody. And I think there's some nuggets in there that can help us down the road make all of Old Town better, while still recognizing that there's some things that have perhaps been waiting a while and perhaps should go forward. So thank you for indulging me there on that. I don't have any more questions right now.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Kyriakou, for saying that. That's really well said. And on that point, I guess my question one of the, first of all, thank you to everybody that came out and spoke and everybody that called in. That's what we really enjoy, is hearing from the public, even if you don't agree. But that is the one caller that was called in about, why can't we wait until Equifowler is done? That would, if I'm understanding is correct, that would put this project off another 2 to 3 years. Am I correct?
Mayor Perotti, you are correct, yeah. So,
Well, that after all the information and all the stories I've heard today as well, just seems not acceptable. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to close the public hearing, public testimony and the public hearing, and entertain going into deliberation. Councilmember Richards.
Thank you. So I'll just start us off here. This project is framed as a complete streets project, which kind of ironically, I don't think it was a complete streets project when it first started. The idea came up 30 so years ago, but somewhere along the line, complete streets became a thing, and there were grants available, and we got funding to do outreach and to draw up some plans a few years ago, and we don't have a complete streets policy. The city does have several documents that incorporate complete streets concepts. In our general plan, our bicycle pedestrian master plan, and even our climate action plan. These were documents that were all developed with a lot of public input, with feedback and input from the community, and they reflect the community's values and a vision for the type of city that we want to have. The documents reflect a desire by our community for more walking, a more walkable, bikeable, city, and where other forms of transportation are safer, and to encourage economic growth and tourism by making our city more welcoming for people to visit of all types of transportation. So the vision of complete streets is reflected in the goals of this project, which were mentioned, increasing parking, reducing speeds, adding bicycle lanes, and reducing traffic accidents. But more than anything, it's about increasing safety. So we want to have a vision of a city that people of all ages and all abilities are able to get around safely using various forms of transportation. And it's true that many of the people who visit Old Town do so in their cars, but it shouldn't be necessary to travel in and around Old Town in your car in order to feel safe. So there are several considerations that are playing in my mind as I evaluate, how we look at this plan. That should guide us in terms of, is this the right plan for Old Town Goleta? And what I would, ask myself and ask others is, to what extent does this proposal live up to our complete streets policies that were adopted and implemented with input from the public from the beginning? To what extent will the project make our city safe and accessible for everyone? Does it protect the life and safety of our seniors, our families, our children? Does it create a more welcoming environment for everyone? Does it increase access? Does it make people safer? And does it increase the ability of people of different modes of transportation to visit Old Town? So if we find that the project fulfills these requirements and answer these questions, then I feel like we need to move forward with it. And that we don't just have empty policy documents sitting on a shelf, that don't have any meat to them, because these are our policies, these are our express values, and this is where I feel like we need to be. So it may be true that pain will be felt, and we hear a lot of concerns about what's going to happen, and a Carmageddon in Old Town, and I do believe that pain may be felt. It may take longer to traverse Old Town, and there may be longer waits at some traffic lights at some times of the day, and there may be some backed up traffic. I'm not going to deny that these things won't exist and that none of that will happen. And I'm not going to try to convince anybody that this is all as I say, rainbows and unicorns, right? But although there may be some pain, I believe it'll be worth it when we understand the trade-offs, that this will mean a safer community for everyone. And isn't it worth it to try something new, knowing that traffic accidents and fatalities may be reduced through what we do here today? How many accidents does it take and how many fatalities does it take before we agree that it's worth taking some action? So something I want to talk about is the fact that, I think it doesn't get a lot of play, that Old Town is a residential community. In the area between Fairview and the 217, if you can picture that, the boundaries of Old Town, there are almost 4,000 people who live north of Hollister Avenue and another 1,000 that live south of Hollister, and that's all just along that corridor between Fairview and the 217. So almost 5,000 people live within a half mile of the project that we're talking about. So, it's true that Hollister Avenue through Old Town is a retail and commercial district, yes, and we value our businesses and we want to support them. And we recognize that this is an important retail corridor of the city. But we also know that it's a residential community where people live. It's a place where children and families walk and ride their bikes, as we've heard. People use and cross Hollister to get to school, to go to the park, to go to the community center, which houses a senior center, a school, and the United Boys and Girls Club. So these are all things that families and children and people use. So as we've seen, safety data show us that Old Town isn't all that safe. And I understand I have to be careful here because I've been advised to not say that it's unsafe, but we can obviously say that we can make it safer. With a safety accident collision rate that's 4 times the state average, there's obviously room for improvement in this area. So shouldn't Old Town be a welcoming place for everyone, including those who live there, for children who want to cross the street, for families going to the park, for commuters catching a bus? We've heard criticism that the plan is about bowing to the bicycle lobby, which represents the spandex-wearing racers who simply want to ride through Old Town. And I can say that because I used to be a spandex-wearing bicyclist, but I don't wear that anymore. But what about the bicyclists who live in Old Town? I mean, what about them? I regularly see, I commute to UCSB on my bike, and on my way back, I ride along Ward Drive, and I regularly see workers leaving the field after work on their way home, commuting on a bicycle, many of them going down Ward Drive and turning left and riding through Old Town. These are commuters that are riding their bikes home, just trying to get from point A to point B, and it happens to be on a bike. Shouldn't Old Town be safe for them? These aren't the spandex riding people who are just trying to get through Old Town. These are commuters. So, I feel like it should be safe for everyone, and I think we need to think about the people who just want to get around their neighborhood safely. This is their neighborhood, this is where they live. They shouldn't worry about taking too many steps off the wrong block and ending up on Hollister Avenue and find themselves in an unsafe environment. So I guess I ask, isn't it worth slowing down traffic if we can save lives and make Hollister more inviting and welcoming for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for users of the bus? And would it be okay if we did not move forward with this plan, knowing that we could have prevented accidents and saved lives by making it safer? So for me, the bottom line is that this plan, I believe, will make Old Town safer for everyone. Safer for the families and the children that live there, and safer for those who visit and shop there. And I think that would be good for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mayor Pro Tem Kasdan.
Yeah, well, first, let me observe that we had a meeting, I don't know how long ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago or something, in which there was initially a different plan proposed. And I give credit to the people in the public, to Tom Junio and others who called out things that hadn't been fully considered before. Those were things reflecting potential emergencies, the ability of to make deliveries for businesses and for turning. This plan is not the same plan. It's redesigned and it's improved. It considers those concerns that were raised before. It incorporates those things. So the concerns about emergencies have been addressed, and that shouldn't be a concern for people. For deliveries, businesses will be able to make deliveries and not have to be concerned about that. So we have a balanced approach right now as I see it, and that is it's going to, first and foremost, as Councilmember Richards described, it is affecting the community. This is a neighborhood, and this is a neighborhood that deserves to have a safe environment to live in. There are kids there's people who shop. They deserve to have a safe environment there. So first and foremost, we're creating a place where people can live and live safely. Second, I think that the plan will help businesses. I don't think it's possible there'll be things that need to be adjusted, but I think it is balanced in the sense that everyone can benefit. And so the last point I would make is that this is supposed to be adaptive. This is something we're going to adjust as we go along and make improvements. If there's congestion, we'll look at it. We'll do things. It'll be monitored, and there'll be a plan for us to figure out how it's doing and what needs to be adjusted. But this is a good way to do business. When we first started talking about this project, before the pandemic, we were talking about a hardscape project. We were talking about one in which we were not going to have just striping, just paint. That was the basis of the project. We're going to redo the roads and redo the medians, and 2/3 of the people, when we had both surveying of the public and going to the community center and putting up the little sticky Post-it notes about which ones you like, 2/3 of the public or so at the time supported the idea of going straight to the hardscape, that is putting in the medians and doing all these things that were going to be in essence permanent. Well, we're not doing that now. We've stepped back and we're able to experiment and learn from it. We're able to treat this as a pilot in essence and go forward with that. Improvements will be made, but we're going to have an opportunity to provide something beneficial for Old Town, the businesses, Old Town, the neighborhood, the community, and so I look forward to it. And I'm glad that after all these years, we're going to have something coming forward. Thank you.
Well, I'll just hop in and be brief. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues that have spoken. A gentleman that I had great respect for said to me once at a meeting here that, Goleta was built for the car. It was just built for the car. But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. You have some challenges. And I think we're finally in a position with all the conversation. I can remember, thank you, Alex Peugeot, for reminding us about, what complete streets, Vision Zero, what is that? And safe routes to school, before anybody knew what safe routes to school. And so we have come a ways. We have some more work to do. But I think moving forward, this is the right time to move forward with this project in Old Town. So I really do appreciate all your stories. Thanks for bringing up Dan Burden. I hadn't remembered his name in a long time, and he was quite the guy that would really with talking about more progressive and road diets, and when we were all like, what is he talking about? It was great to listen to him. So if my other colleagues would like to have, Councilmember Kiriakou.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Of course, I prepared some remarks anticipating we might get here tonight, and then true to form, I'm probably not going to end up delivering hardly any of them, just based on the discussion we've had and the questions that have been asked and the public testimony. Instead, let me just say this, a couple things. The first reason why I support this this project isn't really about bicycles versus not bicycles, or some of the other issues that have been brought up. It's actually more economic. So the way Goleta works right now is you have an old town business district where people really just kind of, they drive there, they do one thing, they drive somewhere else, or as the data shows from the traffic study, like more than a third of them just drive on through and they don't stop. And maybe they become aware of something in Old Town, they come back another time, but they're not coming, right? In the meantime, in Western Goleta, we have the big boxes. We have Camino Real Marketplace. In more northeastern Goleta, we have Calle Real Center, and we have Fairview Center. So we have these different kind of economic hubs where people go and they'll do multiple things. They'll go see a movie and get a bite to eat. Fairview Center, they'll go see a movie and get a bite to eat, et cetera, et cetera. If Goleta's going to work better for everybody, you need to have sort of a counterbalance experience to big boxes. You need to be able to have a place with a small town community feel, a community center. Some might even call it a downtown. And Old Town used to be our downtown, and it hasn't been. Someone talked earlier about it has kind of a highway feel. Well, at one time, a highway was put through. You know, it used to be two little towns, La Patera and La Goleta. And so things have changed over time. So we have an opportunity to make it safer, make it just a better aesthetic experience, less noisy, less exhaust fume smells, just a more pleasant experience, a more inviting experience. There's a reason why there's some businesses that are wanting to come in now that weren't there before, because they see some of the positive things that are happening in Old Town. So I think there's a lot to be excited from an economic development standpoint, because we're going to make it a more pleasant place to live, work, and play. Recognizing that, at least for me, the most important thing is it has to work for the people that already live and work there, and then you can build out from there. And I think this plan is an essential part of doing that, along with the community center improvements and the new park and the new public art and the different other improvements. It all comes together as part of a larger plan. The second reason that I support this is because it's time. It's well past time from a safety perspective. As our public works director said, he's really come to the realization that this is first and foremost a safety project. And I truly believe that. And when I say safety, I don't just mean for people wearing the spandex that was referenced. You know, I live in Old Town, and when I walk around in the morning, and I'm usually walking, you see a lot of bike riders, and they're not the people wearing toe clips. They're stopping at 7-Eleven and getting their breakfast on the way to work, and they're wearing Red Wing work boots. And by the way, there was a comment made about having to get away from Goleta being a place for cars. Well, I have to tell you, my Old Town neighborhood, there's a lot of people where their car is their livelihood. Their car is their job. If you are a gardener, if you are a mechanic, your car is your livelihood. And there's a lot of trucks that need to park there. And so we have to really have a balanced approach. We have to find a way to make this work for the most people possible. That's why some of the compromises are in here. That's why parking is a component of this, because quite frankly, it's really inequitable to expect us to go to 90-minute parking and timed parking and start writing people tickets who live in the most historically underrepresented and excluded community, probably on the South Coast, if we don't actually have a place for them to move their car to. If you have to be expected to move your car every 90 minutes and you spend 20 minutes looking for that space, how are you supposed to, like, that's not a break at your job. I mean, that's just not realistic. And so the fact that we've added, or are in the process of now adding, 80 parking spaces without having to go to pay parking, like some other communities have gone to pay parking or have had pay parking in big structures for years with all the gentrification implications of that, I think is a balanced approach. It's an equitable approach. It's a fairer approach. We complete streets. It's got to be complete for everybody, including people with cars. So for these reasons, I feel like the final hurdle was the safety component, not just the safety from the standpoint of what we talked about earlier in terms of accidents, in terms of collisions, in terms of the injury data, which, I mean, blew me away when I saw it. But, you know, the larger safety components, the angled parking, the fact that for the first time, if you're a parent and you're trying to load or unload your kids out of a car, you're going to be able to do it adjacent to a sidewalk or adjacent to a bike lane, not getting in and out of traffic, as one of our public commenters talked about. That is such an important factor in this for me, and it was why I was so, you know, I got a little offended in June when we talked about the prior plan, because for me, one of the most important components was having that protection for parents and shoppers, anyone who didn't want to have to contend with vehicles coming down the street right at them, and they don't really have anywhere to go to get out of their car or get into their car. And so, unfortunately, this process took a little longer than it perhaps needed to. You know, and I think we all bear responsibility for that, including people up here on the dais like myself. But we're here now. I'm glad we're here now. I think this is a balanced approach. I think this is a fair approach. I think this is a safe approach. And as was made clear from the video, this is an overdue, about time approach. And so I'm happy to also join my colleagues in supporting this.
Councilmember Seves.
You know, I get to be the one that asks the tough questions because, you know, the bottom line is what can we afford to do and what we can't afford to do financially and in planning. You know, there was a lot of heckling tonight. And, you know, I think that's got to stop. When comments are made and you don't agree with it, then just don't agree with it. But to go in the public process and heckle in the room is not appropriate. I didn't like that. And part of the public process is listening to everybody and coming up with the best plan that works. This project is fully funded to a point. But then after that, we have to figure out what more we can do to help Old Town. Old Town's been my priority since I first came on this council. And it's still my priority, even though it's not my district anymore. It's still my priority. But we have to make sure we do it right. And that's why we have to make sure that we engage everybody, those that live in Old Town, those that work in Old Town, the businesses in Old Town, and also those that visit. You know, when you have a business, in fact, they showed that jewelry business on the video, they're not there anymore. They're not there anymore because guess what? There was no parking. So we've got to get engaged in the traffic circulation element and moving cars from Hollister. And if they get a ticket for parking over 90 minutes, it's an education thing. I mean, when I worked in Santa Barbara, I went out every 90 minutes to make sure my car wasn't chocked, so I can move it and not have to pay. Sometimes I got a parking ticket because I didn't move it in time. But now the technology is that they don't even mark them anymore. They just go by and grab it on the computer and come back 90 minutes later, and guess what? You have a parking ticket. But the whole idea is not to write tickets. It's to free up the spots. You know, is this the right business plan? I don't know. Because how many times have you driven down a street anywhere and then noticed, God, I didn't know that business was even there. And then you come back and you visit it. I don't want us to be like Santa Barbara and State Street where the cars were excluded. And of course, because of COVID and the economy, many of them closed. The stores have closed, and you know many of them won't return. We're very fortunate. We have a very dynamic Old Town with our businesses. The businesses have been there for a long time. We have businesses that have, guess what? Residents on the top. Isn't that unique? To have residents on the second story. It's that kind of stuff to encourage. I'm happy that staff is taking this as the first stage, and there's going to be appropriate analysis to make sure we're making the right decision. There may be modifications. May be modifications that you may not like, but there's an engineering reason why we need to make it. And we have to be ready for that and be open to that. But the idea is, yes, safety is a number one priority. Moving people around either on bicycles, pedestrians, or on vehicles, we have to do it in a safe manner. We recently approved that multi-use path that's going from Cairo Real all the way through Old Town. But guess what? With that project, we're like $4 million short. So we have to sit down and figure out how to getting the additional monies, either through grants or reprioritizing the public works projects, which I'd mentioned earlier. So, I want to see the project move forward appropriately. So there'll be further touch points to make sure that we're doing the right thing and spending the money appropriately. But there are so much things to still do in Old Town that I would expect this council to roll up its sleeves and get rid of that big curve that you hit, because I've hit it too. And so it's, if we don't take care of the little things, it's the old broken window theory. If we don't take care of the little things, we're not going to be able to take care of the big things. But we have to do it together, and we all have to roll up our sleeves and do it together. So, again, you may not hear what you like. There is a compromises that need to be made from every segment of the community to come out with a project and a safe project that works. I mean, the accident rates, yeah, but some of that is dated. We have to make sure that we stay on top of the accident rates. We got to make sure that we analyze where the accidents are occurring and why they're occurring. I mean, we had a bicyclist, unfortunately, that was injured on Los Caneros because that bicyclist ran a red light. And that bicyclist, guess what, didn't have a helmet on. So, we built the roundabout. You don't like the roundabout, but we built the roundabout at Los Caneros. Guess why? We had too many accidents. And most of them were bicyclists that weren't stopping for the stop sign. That's why that roundabout went in there. So we all have to take ownership in maintaining a safe environment, make sure we follow the rules and the laws. And, a bicyclist or even like a vehicle coming to red light, you get impatient, you want to run it. No, because those have consequences. So I am going to see this go forward. I'm glad we're having touch points on it. And I'm glad this is just the first step for more projects in Old Town. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Richards.
I'm ready to make a motion if we're at that point.
I think I did close the public hearing. I think we are ready for a motion.
All right.
Would you like to make it?
Well, yes, I would be happy to. I move that we approve staff's recommendation of alternative 1 with north side back-in angled parking, buffered bike lanes, and non-traversable painted median as the preferred project alternative, and direct staff to move forward with final design and construction phases, and adopt resolution number 22 next in line, entitled Resolution of the City Council of the City of Goleta, California, deeming the Hollister Avenue Old Town Interim Striping Project categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act.
And I'd be glad to second my friend's motion.
Great.
Okay, any more discussion? I'm not seeing any. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Richards?
Yes.
Councilmember Kiriakou?
Aye.
Councilmember Aceves?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hasden?
Aye.
And Mayor Perotti?
Aye. Locked in our votes. It's going to be up there any minute. Where is it? Come on. Did someone not lock in their vote? It was unanimous.
Do ayes have it?
It was unanimous. I wanted to see it on the screen, but. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned.